3:45 p.m. The explosion tore through Cedar Falls like thunder. Glass erupted. Steel screamed. The 10-story Ashford Industries building shuddered, then began its violent descent into chaos. Smoke poured from shattered windows. People fled in terror, their screams echoing off concrete walls. But Ryan Mitchell ran toward the collapsing tower, his worn work boots hammering against asphalt as burning debris showered down like deadly rain. Sirens wailed in the distance, their urgent cries seeming to ask the same question as the bystanders who watched in horror. Why would anyone run towards such danger? Why would this man, this ordinary electrician, with faded jeans and calloused hands, race into a collapsing building that even professional rescuers hesitated to enter? The answer lay in what had happened 8 hours earlier, in the moments and choices that had led Ryan Mitchell to this impossible decision. 8 hours earlier, 6:30 a.m., had started like any other day in the Mitchell household. Grace sat at their tiny kitchen table, carefully spreading peanut butter on day-old bread while Ryan packed his weathered toolbox. The 7-year-old hummed softly to herself, her blonde hair catching the pale sunlight streaming through their apartment's single window. Bills covered half the table like unwelcome guests, each one stamped with bold red letters that screamed "overdue" in unforgiving capital letters. "Daddy, will you be home for dinner tonight?" Grace asked, not looking up from her sandwich. Her voice carried that careful tone children use when they're trying not to sound disappointed. Ryan glanced at Helen's watch on his wrist, the scratched face showing 6:32 a.m. exactly. The timepiece had been running slow for months, but he couldn't bring himself to fix it or replace it. Some things were meant to stay broken, he thought, like a monument to what once was. "I'll try, sweetheart," he said, kissing the top of her head. "Mrs. Henderson will pick you up from school if I'm running late." The lie tasted bitter on his tongue. He knew he'd be working until dark, chasing every dollar to keep their heads above water. Grace nodded and took a bite of her sandwich, pretending not to notice that there was no jelly to go with the peanut butter. They'd run out 3 days ago, and grocery money wouldn't come until Friday. "We need more jelly," Grace said, simply not complaining, just stating a fact. Ryan's hand paused over his toolbox. He fought the impulse to check his wallet again, knowing exactly what he'd find: $18.37. Not enough for the water bill, not enough for Grace's school supplies, certainly not enough for both. "I know, Gracie. We'll get some on Friday, okay?" He forced a smile. "Maybe the strawberry kind you like." Grace nodded, looking up with those impossibly blue eyes so much like Helen's that it sometimes stole his breath. "I know, Daddy. It's okay." Ryan shouldered his tool bag and headed for the door, but Grace's voice stopped him. "Daddy, Mommy's watch is still keeping good time, right?" He turned to see her watching him. "Yes, baby girl," he whispered, his throat tight. "It's keeping perfect time." The watch face caught the morning light, and for just a moment he could almost hear Helen's voice telling him that love doesn't need to be perfect to be real. 2 years since cancer took her, and still sometimes her presence felt so real he could almost turn and find her standing there. "Mrs. Henderson says we might not have school next year." Grace said, her small fingers carefully folding the wax paper around the remainder of her sandwich. "She says they might tear it down." "Is that true, Daddy?" Ryan froze, hand on the doorknob. He'd heard rumors about Lincoln Elementary being purchased by some corporation, but he'd dismissed them as just that, rumors. The school was the heart of their neighborhood, the one solid thing in Grace's life besides him. "I don't think so, sweetheart. Mrs. Henderson probably just heard some silly, grown-up talk." He knelt down to her level. "But even if something did happen to your school, I promise we'd figure it out. Together." "Okay." In the hallway, Ryan helped Mrs. Abernathy from 3B with a leaking garbage bag. The elderly woman smiled gratefully. "Mitchell, you're an angel in work boots. That daughter of yours doing all right?" "She's perfect, Mrs. Abernathy. Getting all A's." The old woman's eyes softened. "Helen would be proud of you both. You tell that little girl I've got some cookies for her later, if it's all right with you." This was his world, people helping people, neighbors sharing what little they had. The Ashford Industries building loomed over downtown Cedar Falls like a glass and steel fortress. Ryan parked his battered pickup truck in the service entrance, noting how out of place it looked among the sleek sedans and luxury SUVs that filled the executive parking spaces. He'd been called in for an emergency electrical repair, something about a power surge that had knocked out half the building's systems during the night. The security guard, a heavy-set man named Joe, waved him through with a sympathetic smile. "Good luck in there, Ryan. The boss lady's been tearing through people all morning like a tornado through a trailer park." "Heard your kid goes to Lincoln, right?" Joe called after him. Ryan turned a question in his eyes. "Yeah, why?" Joe looked uncomfortable, glancing around as if checking for eavesdroppers. "Just keep your ears open while you're upstairs. There's talk about that neighborhood." Before Ryan could ask what he meant, Joe was called away by another guard. The service elevator doors closed with a soft hydraulic sigh, leaving Ryan alone with a growing sense of unease. The basement level hummed with the sound of generators and cooling systems, a mechanical heartbeat that kept the building alive. Ryan found the electrical panel that had been causing problems, a complex web of circuits and switches that would take hours to properly diagnose and repair. He was just getting started when he heard the sharp click of high heels on concrete, each step echoing like a countdown to Judgment Day. Victoria Ashford appeared at the bottom of the stairs like something out of a magazine, spread her blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun that matched her severe expression. Her charcoal gray suit probably cost more than Ryan made in 3 months, and the diamond studs in her ears caught the fluorescent light like tiny stars. She surveyed the basement with obvious distaste, as if the very air down here might contaminate her expensive clothes. "You're the electrician," she said, not bothering to make it a question. Her voice was crisp and cold, each word carefully chosen and delivered with surgical precision. "How long will this take?" Ryan looked up from the electrical panel, wiping his hands on a shop rag that had seen better days. "About 3 hours, ma'am," he replied, trying to keep his voice level and professional. "I need to trace the problem through multiple circuits to make sure it doesn't happen again." Victoria's eyebrows arched in disbelief and her lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. "I have a conference call with Goldman Sachs at 11:00 a.m. This building needs to be fully operational by then, or there will be consequences." "I understand the urgency, ma'am, but if I don't do this right, you could have a much bigger problem on your hands," Ryan said, turning back to the panel. "Electrical fires don't care about conference calls." Across town in the top-floor office of Ashford Industries' downtown headquarters, Thomas Harrington reviewed the final plans for the Lincoln Heights development project. The architectural renderings showed a gleaming shopping complex where a shabby neighborhood currently stood. The centerpiece, a massive luxury mall, would sit precisely where Lincoln Elementary School currently educated 300 children from Cedar Falls working-class families. "The demolition timeline seems aggressive," noted Sandra Park Ashford's head of development. "We're talking about displacing families, businesses, a school. The PR nightmare alone? The PR is Victoria's problem." Harrington interrupted, his voice carrying the easy confidence of a man accustomed to getting his way. "I handle the financials and they look exceptional." The office door opened and Victoria's assistant Melanie entered with a stack of reports. "Ashford is currently in the West Building dealing with the electrical issues. She asked me to deliver these financial projections for the Lincoln project. Personally checking on electrical problems." Harrington raised an eyebrow. "That doesn't sound like our Victoria." After Melanie left, Harrington picked up the top report, flipping through it with practiced efficiency. "Victoria's getting soft," he muttered. "First she questions the environmental impact, now she's personally overseeing maintenance. This isn't the killer I mentored." He paused at a framed photograph on Victoria's desk, an old family picture that seemed out of place among the modern minimalist decor. In it, a much younger Victoria stood beside an older man in a hospital bed. Her smile in the photo lacked the sharp edges it had acquired in the years since. Harrington turned the frame face down with a casual flick of his wrist. "Sentiment is a liability in this business. I thought I'd taught her that." In the basement of the West Building, the silence that followed Ryan's words was so complete he could hear the hum of the building's HVAC system 2 floors above. When Victoria finally spoke, her voice had dropped to a temperature that could freeze water. "Did you just lecture me about my own building?" she asked, each word dripping with ice-cold contempt. "Do you have any idea who I am?" Ryan kept working his hands steady despite the tension radiating from the woman behind him. "You're Victoria Ashford," he said without turning around, "CEO of Ashford Industries. And I'm Ryan Mitchell, the guy trying to keep your building from burning down." The honesty in his voice seemed to catch her off guard, but only for a moment. Victoria stepped closer, close enough that he could smell her expensive perfume mixing with the metallic scent of the electrical equipment. "How long have you been doing this kind of work, Mr. Mitchell?" She asked, her tone shifting to something that might have been curiosity if it weren't so clearly condescending. 8 years, Ryan replied, finally turning to face her. "Started right out of high school, worked my way up from apprentice." 8 years, she repeated, as if the number itself was somehow offensive. "And this is as far as you've gotten? No ambitions beyond crawling around in basements and fixing other people's problems?" The question hit like a physical blow, but Ryan kept his expression neutral. He'd heard variations of it before, usually from people who'd never had to choose between paying the electric bill and buying groceries for their child. "I have a daughter to support," he said, simply, the words carrying more weight than any defense he could have offered. "This work puts food on our table and keeps a roof over her head. That's ambition enough for me." Victoria's gaze dropped to his wrist where Helen's watch caught the harsh basement lighting. The leather band was cracked and worn, the silver case tarnished with age and use. "Is that supposed to be a watch?" she asked, her voice taking on a tone of mock fascination. "It looks like something you'd find at a garage sale." Ryan's hand moved instinctively to cover the timepiece, a protective gesture that didn't go unnoticed. "It belonged to my wife," he said quietly, his voice carrying a warning that Victoria either didn't hear or chose to ignore. "Your wife," she repeated, tilting her head like a predator studying wounded prey. "Present tense or past tense, Mr. Mitchell?" "Past tense," he said finally, the words barely above a whisper. "She died 2 years ago." Victoria nodded as if this confirmed something she'd already suspected. "Cancer?" she asked, and when Ryan nodded, she made a soft sound that might have been sympathy if it weren't so obviously calculated. "That must have been expensive," she continued, her voice dripping with false concern. "Medical treatment, final expenses. Is that why you're still doing this kind of work? Because you're drowning in debt?" Ryan turned back to the electrical panel, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for his multimeter. "The bills are manageable," he lied, his voice tight. Victoria laughed, a sound like glass breaking in an empty room. "Manageable," she repeated. "Is that what you call 30,000 in medical debt? Because that's what it says in the credit report I had my people pull on you this morning." The multimeter slipped from Ryan's fingers, clattering to the concrete floor with a sound that seemed to echo forever. He turned slowly to face Victoria, his face pale with shock. "You had me investigated," he asked, his voice barely controlled. "Why would you do that?" "I make it a point to know who I'm dealing with," Victoria replied with a casual shrug, as if ordering background checks on service workers was as normal as checking the weather, especially when they're working in my building. In her office across town, Victoria's assistant, Melanie, quietly closed the door behind Harrington and Sandra, then moved to Victoria's desk. With practiced efficiency, she picked up the photo Harrington had turned face down and restored it to its proper position. The man in the hospital bed. Victoria's father smiled weakly at the camera, his hand clasped by a nurse who stood just out of frame, only her arm visible at the edge of the photo. Melanie's fingers traced the edge of the frame, her expression thoughtful. "She's not like you think," she whispered to the empty office. "Not anymore." "Did you know your daughter attends Lincoln Elementary?" Victoria continued, her voice casual, as if discussing the weather. "The school we're planning to demolish next month for our new shopping complex." The basement suddenly felt smaller, the air thicker and harder to breathe. Ryan stared at Victoria as if seeing her for the first time, recognizing the predator beneath the polished exterior. "You're going to tear down Grace's school?" he asked, his voice hollow with disbelief. "Where will the kids go? There's no other elementary school for 20 miles. "That's not my problem," Victoria said with a dismissive wave of her manicured hand. "Progress requires sacrifice, Mr. Mitchell. Some people understand that, and others," she gestured at him with obvious disdain, "spend their lives clinging to dead wives and broken dreams." The words hit like physical blows, each one carefully chosen to cause maximum damage. Ryan's hands clenched into fists at his sides, the leather of Helen's watch band creaking under the pressure. "Don't," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Don't you dare talk about my wife." Victoria smiled, recognizing that she'd found his breaking point, and decided to push just a little harder. "That pathetic relic still ticks?" she asked, pointing at Helen's watch with one perfectly manicured finger. Your daughter deserves better than a father clinging to ghosts. She deserves someone who can actually provide for her, someone who isn't drowning in debt and self-pity. Her diamond earrings caught the fluorescent light as she leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more venom than a shout. When Grace grows up and realizes what kind of man her father really is, when she understands that you chose sentiment over her future, she's going to be ashamed of you. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the distant hum of machinery and the soft tick of Helen's watch marking the seconds. Ryan stood frozen, his face pale and his breathing shallow, as if Victoria's words had knocked all the air from his lungs. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "Get out," he whispered, not trusting himself to say more. Victoria smiled, satisfied with the damage she'd inflicted. "Finish the work, Mr. Mitchell," she said, turning toward the stairs. "And try not to let your personal problems affect the quality of your work. I'd hate to have to find someone more competent." Her heels clicked against the concrete as she walked away, each step echoing like a funeral dirge in the confined space. Ryan stood alone in the basement for a long time after she left, staring at Helen's watch and trying to process what had just happened. The timepiece continued its steady rhythm, marking the passage of moments that felt like hours. He thought about Grace, probably sitting in her classroom at Lincoln Elementary right now, unaware that her school was scheduled for demolition. He thought about Helen, who had worn this watch every day of their marriage, who had believed that love was stronger than money and that kindness mattered more than success. His hands trembled as he picked up the multimeter from the floor, the plastic casing now cracked from the fall. Another expense he couldn't afford, another small defeat in a long line of losses. But he couldn't afford to walk away from this job either. Not with those bills waiting on the kitchen table, not with Grace needing new shoes and school supplies and 100 other things he struggled to provide. Ryan took a deep breath and turned back to the electrical panel. The work was familiar, logical, something he could control when everything else seemed to be falling apart. He traced circuits and tested connections, losing himself in the mechanical precision of the task. It was nearly 11:30 when he finally completed the repairs and packed his tools. The building's power systems were running smoothly, all circuits tested and verified safe. He made his way to the main floor, hoping to collect his payment and escape before encountering Victoria again. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. The lobby of Ashford Industries was a monument to corporate power. All marble floors and glass walls that soared up to a ceiling lost in shadows. Executive assistants in expensive suits moved with purpose across the polished stone, their footsteps creating a symphony of importance and urgency. Ryan felt out of place in his work clothes, like a smudge of reality on an otherwise perfect picture. Victoria emerged from the elevator, surrounded by a small army of lawyers and assistants, all of them moving with the choreographed precision of a military unit. She was on her phone, speaking in rapid-fire sentences about market positions and quarterly projections, her voice carrying the kind of authority that could move millions of dollars with a single word. "The Cedar Falls project is green-lighted," she was saying into her phone, not bothering to lower her voice despite the crowded lobby. "Demolition starts next month. The elementary school, the community center, the whole neighborhood. It's all coming down to make room for progress." She paused, listening to whoever was on the other end of the call, then laughed in a way that sounded like ice cubes clinking in an empty glass. "Collateral damage," she continued, her eyes scanning the lobby until they landed on Ryan standing near the security desk. "Some people just don't understand that sentiment doesn't pay the bills. They cling to the past instead of embracing the future." Her gaze lingered on him for a moment, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth before she turned and headed for the main entrance. Ryan watched her go, his mind reeling with the casual cruelty of her words. She wasn't just destroying his daughter's school. She was destroying an entire community, wiping out decades of history and memories to build another shopping mall. And she was doing it with the kind of cold calculation that treated human lives like numbers on a spreadsheet. Joe appeared beside him, his security uniform crisp despite the late morning heat. "Got your payment slip right here," he said, handing Ryan a small envelope. "Accounts payable said to tell you the check will be mailed next week." Ryan nodded, still watching Victoria as she stepped into a sleek black town car waiting at the curb. "What's happening with Lincoln Elementary, Joe? Is it really being torn down?" Joe's expression darkened. "That's what I was trying to warn you about earlier. The whole neighborhood's been sold. Ashford Industries is turning it into some fancy shopping complex. Lincoln Heights Galleria, they're calling it. But what about the people who live there? The families? Where are they supposed to go? Joe shrugged, the gesture heavy with resignation. Not Ashford's problem, according to the briefing we got. There's relocation compensation, but it's a joke. Wouldn't cover first and last month's rent in this market. Ryan felt a surge of anger unlike anything he'd experienced since Helen's diagnosis. This can't be legal. There must be zoning laws, community protections. All taken care of, Joe said, lowering his voice. Word is Ashford's got half the city council in their pocket. The other half's too scared to stand up to them. The afternoon stretched ahead of him like an empty highway filled with hours he needed to kill before picking up Grace from school. He drove aimlessly through Cedar Falls past the small houses and local businesses that made up his world, trying to process the morning's events. Every street corner held a memory. Every building told a story of the life he'd built with Helen and was now trying to preserve for Grace. Almost without conscious decision, Ryan found himself parking outside Lincoln Elementary School. The building wasn't much to look at, red brick worn by decades of weather windows that needed cleaning, a playground with equipment that had seen better days. But it was a good school with teachers who cared, where Grace felt safe and had friends. The kind of place where a kid could be a kid, regardless of whether their lunch came in a designer bag or a recycled paper sack. From his truck, he could see children playing in the schoolyard, their laughter carrying across the asphalt. He spotted Grace among them, her blonde hair catching the sunlight as she played hopscotch with two other girls. She looked happy, carefree, in a way that children should be, but that Ryan rarely felt himself anymore. A knock on his window startled him. A woman in her early 30s with curly brown hair and kind eyes peered in at him. "Everything okay?" she asked, her voice muffled through the glass. Ryan rolled down the window, recognizing Grace's teacher, Ms. Carter. "Just checking on Grace," he explained, feeling suddenly self-conscious. "Had a job finish early." Ms. Carter smiled, but there was something strained about it. "She's doing great, Mr. Mitchell. One of my brightest students." "I heard a rumor," Ryan said, watching her expression carefully, "about the school being torn down. Is it true?" The smile vanished from Ms. Carter's face. "We're not supposed to discuss it with parents yet. There's going to be an official announcement next week. But yes, it's true. Ashford Industries bought the land. We have until the end of the semester." "That's less than 2 months," Ryan said, the reality of the timeline hitting him like a physical blow. "I know. It's not nearly enough time for families to make arrangements or for teachers to find new positions." She glanced over her shoulder at the children playing, her expression darkening. "Most of these kids don't have options, Mr. Mitchell. Their parents can't drive them 20 miles to the next district. They can't afford private school. They'll just fall through the cracks." Ryan thought about what Victoria had said that morning about progress requiring sacrifice. But it was never the powerful who sacrificed. It was always people like these children, like Grace, who paid the price. "There must be something we can do," he said, more to himself than to Ms. Carter. She gave him a look that mingled hope with resignation. "There's a community meeting tonight at the Cedar Falls Community Center. Some parents are trying to organize a protest, maybe get the city council to reconsider the zoning changes. But honestly, I don't think Ashford Industries is going to be stopped by a few angry parents." Ryan thanked her for the information and watched as she returned to the playground, clapping her hands to signal the end of recess. The children lined up with varying degrees of reluctance, Grace among them. She spotted him in the truck and waved enthusiastically, her whole face lighting up at the unexpected sight of her father. He waved back, his heart simultaneously warming at her joy and breaking at the thought of telling her that her school would soon be gone, that her friends would be scattered across different districts, that Miss Carter might not be her teacher anymore, that the life they'd carefully rebuilt after Helen's death was about to be disrupted again. As the children filed back into the building, Ryan made a decision. He would go to that community meeting tonight. He would find out what options existed, and he would not let Victoria Ashford destroy his daughter's world without a fight. At 7:00 p.m., the Cedar Falls Community Center was packed beyond capacity. Parents, teachers, and concerned citizens filled every seat, lined the walls, and spilled out into the hallway. The air was thick with tension and the mingled sense of coffee, perfume, and anxiety. Ryan found a spot near the back, standing behind the last row of chairs where he could see the makeshift stage at the front of the room. A middle-aged man in a rumpled suit was speaking, his voice strained with the effort of remaining calm. Ashford Industries has already secured the necessary permits, he was saying, holding up a sheaf of papers. The zoning changes were approved in a closed session last month. The sale is final. Demolition is scheduled to begin in 6 weeks. The room erupted in angry voices, parents shouting questions and accusations. Ryan watched the chaos, feeling both part of it and somehow separate, as if he were observing the scene through a pane of glass. These people were fighting for their homes, their neighborhood, their children's school. But Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that it was already too late, that Victoria Ashford had ensured their defeat before they even knew they were at war. "What about our children?" a woman demanded, rising from her seat in the front row. "Where are they supposed to go to school?" "Ashford has suggested that the district can provide buses to Harrison Elementary," the man replied, looking uncomfortable. "It's about 20 miles away." 20 miles, another parent exclaimed. "That's an hour each way with traffic. My kids are 6 and 8. They'd be leaving home at 600 a.m. "And what about those of us who don't have cars?" someone else called out. "How are we supposed to get to parent-teacher conferences? What if our kids get sick during the day?" The questions continued, each one highlighting another aspect of the hardship that Ashford's plan would create. Ryan listened, mentally adding his own concerns to the growing list. Grace would lose the stability she desperately needed. She'd lose friends she'd made after Helen's death. She'd lose Mrs. Carter, who had been so patient with her during those first difficult months when Grace barely spoke at all. As the meeting progressed, various community members offered suggestions, legal challenges, public protests, media campaigns. But with each idea came the sobering reality that they were fighting a corporation with virtually unlimited resources, political connections, and a CEO who seemed entirely devoid of empathy. After the formal portion of the meeting ended, people gathered in smaller groups, exchanging contact information and making plans. Ryan found himself talking with a small cluster of parents from Grace's class, including a woman named Diane, whose daughter was Grace's best friend. "This is Sarah's first stable school environment since her father left," Diane was saying, her voice tight with restrained emotion. "She's finally making progress, finally feeling secure again. And now this." Ryan nodded, understanding completely. "Grace lost her mother 2 years ago. Lincoln Elementary has been our rock, Ms. Carter especially." "It's not just about the inconvenience," another parent added. "It's about tearing apart a community. These kids rely on each other. The parents rely on each other. We carpool, we babysit each other's kids, we look out for one another. You can't just pick that up and transplant it 20 miles away." As the conversation continued, Ryan found himself growing increasingly angry. Not just at Victoria Ashford, but at a system that allowed the wealthy and powerful to make decisions that devastated ordinary people without consequence. He thought about Victoria's mocking words that morning, her casual dismissal of his life and work, her cruel comments about Helen's watch. "We need to make them see us as people," he said, suddenly interrupting a discussion about potential legal strategies. "Not as obstacles to be removed or problems to be solved, real people with real lives that matter." The others looked at him, surprised by the intensity in his voice. "How do we do that?" Diane asked. "They don't exactly invite people like us to their corporate boardrooms." Ryan didn't have an answer, not yet. But as he drove home that night, Grace asleep in the passenger seat after the long meeting, an idea began to form. Victoria Ashford had made this personal by targeting his daughter's school, by mocking Helen's memory, by treating him as if he were beneath her notice. Perhaps it was time to return the favor, to make this personal for her too. The next morning, Ryan called his regular clients and rescheduled his appointments for the day. He packed a simple lunch for Grace, helped her with her backpack, and walked her to school as usual. But instead of heading to his first job afterward, he drove back to the Ashford Industries West building. Joe looked surprised to see him. "Electrical problems again?" he asked, checking his security tablet. "No," Ryan replied. "I need to speak with Ms. Ashford." Joe's eyebrows shot up. "Victoria Ashford, CEO?" "Victoria Ashford. That's the one." Joe shook his head. "No chance, man. She doesn't take unscheduled meetings, especially not with—" He trailed off, but Ryan could fill in the blank. "Especially not with people like you. Working class people. Service providers. the invisible individuals who kept the world running but weren't deemed important enough to have a voice in how it was run. It's important, Ryan insisted. It's about the Lincoln Heights project. Joe hesitated, clearly torn between sympathy for Ryan's situation and the requirements of his job. Look, he said, finally lowering his voice. She's not even here today. She's at the main building downtown in meetings all day. But even if she was here, you couldn't just walk in and see her. That's not how it works. Ryan nodded, accepting the reality but not defeated by it. Thanks, Joe. I appreciate the honesty. As he turned to leave, Joe called after him. Hey, Mitchell, there's a public hearing next Tuesday. City Council chambers. It's probably just a formality at this point, but if you want to speak, that's your best shot at being heard. Ryan drove to the downtown building, not expecting to get past the front desk, but needing to try anyway. The main Ashford Industries headquarters was even more imposing than the West Building, 30 stories of gleaming steel and glass that dominated the Cedar Falls skyline. The lobby was a cathedral to corporate wealth, all soaring ceilings and polished marble with a massive sculpture of the Ashford logo as its centerpiece. The security desk was staffed by 3 guards in dark suits, none of whom looked as friendly as Joe. Ryan approached anyway, straightening his shoulders and trying to project a confidence he didn't feel. I need to see Victoria Ashford, he said to the nearest guard, a stone-faced man with a military haircut. The guard didn't even look up from his computer screen. Do you have an appointment? No, but then you don't see Ms. Ashford. You can call her office to request a meeting. Next, please. Ryan stood his ground. It's about the Lincoln Heights project. I'm a parent at Lincoln Elementary. I just want 5 minutes. Now the guard did look up, his expression a mixture of annoyance and pity. Sir, Ms. Ashford doesn't handle community relations. There's a dedicated team for that. I can give you their contact information. I've already spoken with them. They can't help. Then I suggest you accept that and move on. Ms. Ashford is in meetings all day with our board of directors. She is not available to speak with you. Not today, not tomorrow, not without an appointment that I can guarantee you won't get. Now please move along before I have to call additional security. Defeated but not surprised, Ryan turned away from the desk. As he crossed the lobby toward the exit, he noticed a tall, distinguished-looking man in his 60s entering through the revolving door. The man wore an impeccably tailored suit and carried himself with the unmistakable air of someone accustomed to power. The security guards straightened visibly as he approached, and the stone-faced one who had dismissed Ryan actually smiled. Good morning, Mr. Harrington, he said, his tone completely transformed. Ms. Ashford is expecting you in the boardroom. Harrington nodded without really seeing the guard, his attention already on his phone. As he passed Ryan, their shoulders nearly brushing, Ryan caught a glimpse of the screen, a document titled Lincoln Heights Environmental Impact Assessment. Before he could see more, Harrington moved past him toward the elevators, surrounded by an almost visible aura of privilege that parted the crowd of people in the lobby like the Red Sea. Ryan watched him go, a plan forming in his mind. If Victoria Ashford wouldn't meet with him directly, perhaps there was another way to get the information he needed. Joe had mentioned a public hearing, a chance to speak. But what would he say? What argument could possibly sway people who saw his entire neighborhood as nothing more than underutilized space? He needed leverage, something that would make them listen. And to get that, he needed information. Ryan spent the rest of the day at the Cedar Falls Public Library using their computers to research Ashford Industries, the Lincoln Heights project, and Victoria Ashford herself. What he found was both unsurprising and deeply disturbing. Ashford Industries had a history of similar developments across the country, buying up lower-income neighborhoods, demolishing existing structures, and replacing them with luxury shopping centers, high-end condominiums, and corporate parks. In each case, the original residents were displaced, often ending up scattered across different areas, their communities effectively destroyed. There were also troubling patterns in the company's environmental practices. While their public materials emphasized sustainability and green initiatives, public records told a different story. Multiple projects had resulted in environmental violations, though the fines were typically so small relative to Ashford's profits that they amounted to little more than a minor business expense. As for Victoria Ashford herself, the public record painted a picture of a ruthless corporate climber who had taken over the company from her father, Edward Ashford, following his death 5 years earlier. Under her leadership, Ashford Industries had nearly doubled its market value, but had also become significantly more aggressive in its business practices. Where Edward had at least maintained a pretense of corporate social responsibility, Victoria seemed to have abandoned even that facade. By the time Ryan left the library, it was nearly time to pick up Grace from her after-school program. His mind was spinning with all he had learned, trying to find the angle, the weakness, the pressure point that might save Lincoln Elementary and the surrounding neighborhood. As he walked to his truck, his phone rang an unknown number. Assuming it was a potential client, he answered quickly. Mitchell Electric. Mr. Mitchell. The voice was coolly professional, female, vaguely familiar. This is Melanie Ward, Ms. Ashford's executive assistant. I understand you have been trying to speak with her today. Ryan stopped walking, surprised. Yes, that's right. About the Lincoln Heights project. Ms. Ashford does not take unscheduled meetings, especially regarding matters that are already settled. However, she has asked me to inform you that if you persist in attempting to contact her directly, she will be forced to consider it harassment and respond accordingly. The threat was clear, but something about the call didn't make sense. How did you get this number? And how did you know I was trying to see her? There was a slight pause before Melanie answered. We have your contact information from your work at our West building. As for the rest, Ashford Industries maintains comprehensive security protocols. You mean someone told her I was asking for her? Another pause. Is there anything else, Mr. Mitchell? Ryan thought for a moment. Yes, actually. Tell Ms. Ashford that I'll be at the public hearing on Tuesday. And tell her I'm not going away. This isn't about me. It's about 300 kids who deserve better than to have their school demolished for a shopping mall. I'll convey your message, Melanie replied, her tone neutral. Good day, Mr. Mitchell. The call ended, leaving Ryan standing in the library parking lot with the strange feeling that something important had just happened. Victoria Ashford, CEO of a billion-dollar company, had sent her personal assistant to warn him off, which meant one of two things. Either she was so petty that she felt the need to intimidate every person who crossed her path, or something about his interest in the Lincoln Heights project had genuinely concerned her. Either way, he had her attention. Now he just needed to figure out how to use it. That evening, after Grace was asleep, Ryan sat at their small kitchen table with a legal pad, making notes about everything he had learned. The stack of overdue bills still sat in the corner, but he pushed them aside, focusing instead on the task at hand. There had to be a way to stop this development, to save the school and the neighborhood. Something he was missing, some angle he hadn't considered. As he worked, Helen's watch ticked steadily on his wrist, the sound both comforting and painful. He could almost hear her voice, gentle but determined. Some fights are worth having, even if you might lose. It had been her mantra during her battle with cancer, a battle she had ultimately lost, but had fought with a grace and courage that still took his breath away when he thought about it. Ryan was so deep in thought that he almost missed the soft knock at his door. Glancing at the watch, he frowned. It was nearly 11:00 p.m., far too late for casual visitors. He approached the door cautiously, looking through the peephole. To his utter shock, Victoria Ashford stood in the hallway of his apartment building. She was dressed more casually than he had seen her before. Dark jeans, a simple blouse, her hair loose around her shoulders rather than pulled back in that severe bun. But there was no mistaking her perfect posture, her expensive perfume that somehow penetrated even the solid wood of the door or the regal tilt of her chin as she waited impatiently. Ryan opened the door, too surprised to speak. Victoria took in his shocked expression with cool amusement. Mr. Mitchell, she said, her voice lower than it had been in the basement, but no less commanding. May I come in? I believe we have some matters to discuss. Without waiting for his response, she stepped past him into the apartment, her eyes taking in the modest furnishings, the faded couch, the small television, the kitchen table covered in his notes. Her gaze lingered for a moment on a crayon drawing taped to the refrigerator, Grace's rendering of herself and Ryan standing in front of what was clearly meant to be Lincoln Elementary. Charming, she said in a tone that suggested it was anything but. I won't take much of your time. I simply wanted to make something clear in person, since you seem determined to make a nuisance of yourself. Ryan closed the door, his initial shock giving way to anger. How did you find out where I live? Victoria raised an eyebrow. I told you yesterday, Mr. Mitchell. I make it a point to know who I'm dealing with. You mean you had me investigated, invaded my privacy, pulled my credit report without permission? She waved a hand dismissively. Semantics. The point is, I'm here to offer you a choice. A simple one, really. Ryan crossed his arms, waiting. The Lincoln Heights project is happening. Victoria continued moving around his living room like a museum visitor examining primitive artifacts. The zoning is approved, the permits are issued, the financing is secured. Nothing you or any other concerned parent says at the public hearing on Tuesday is going to change that. It's a formality, nothing more. Then why are you here? Ryan asked. If it's such a done deal, why bother with the small-time electrician who's making a nuisance of himself? Victoria turned to face him, her expression unreadable. Because I'm offering you a way out. For you and your daughter, a relocation package substantially more generous than what the other families will receive. Enough to move to a better neighborhood, enroll Grace in a private school, perhaps even make a dent in that medical debt you're carrying. The offer hung in the air between them, tempting in its practical benefits, but repulsive in its implication. She was trying to buy him off to silence one potentially troublesome voice before the public hearing. And what would I have to do for this generous offer? He asked, already knowing the answer. Nothing complicated. Stay away from the hearing on Tuesday. Encourage other parents to accept the inevitable. Focus on your own family instead of some misguided attempt at community activism. Ryan studied her face, trying to understand what was really happening here. Victoria Ashford didn't seem like the type to personally handle potential opposition to her projects, especially not someone she clearly viewed as insignificant as him. There had to be more to this visit than a simple bribe. Why me? He asked finally. There are hundreds of families affected by this project, dozens of parents organizing against it. Why come to my apartment at 11 at night to offer me specifically a special deal? Something flickered across Victoria's face so quickly that Ryan almost missed it. Uncertainty, discomfort. Whatever it was, it vanished as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by her usual cool composure. Let's just say I have a particular interest in ensuring this project proceeds smoothly, she replied. And my sources tell me you're becoming rather vocal in your opposition. I prefer to address potential problems directly. Ryan's eyes narrowed. Your sources? You mean you've had someone watching me? Victoria didn't confirm or deny her silence its own answer. The answer is no, Ryan said firmly. I won't be bought off. This isn't just about Grace or me. It's about an entire community, people who've lived here for generations, children who need their school, lives that matter even if they don't fit into your profit margins. Victoria's expression hardened. Don't be naive, Mr. Mitchell. One person cannot stop progress, especially not someone in your financial position. Maybe not, Ryan conceded, but I can try, and I'll sleep better knowing I did. For a long moment, Victoria simply looked at him, her gaze so intense that Ryan had to resist the urge to step back. Then, unexpectedly, her expression softened. You remind me of someone I used to know, she said quietly, almost to herself. Then more briskly, very well, I made the offer. You've rejected it. We both know where we stand. She moved toward the door, then paused with her hand on the knob. Without turning around, she added, I should warn you, Mr. Mitchell, if you persist in opposing this project, I will not be so generous when we next meet. Ashford Industries protects its interests thoroughly. After she left, Ryan stood in the middle of his small living room, replaying the strange encounter in his mind. There had been something off about the entire interaction, something that didn't fit with the Victoria Ashford he had met in the basement. A vulnerability beneath the Ice Queen exterior, perhaps, or a secret she was protecting. Whatever it was, he had the distinct feeling that he had just stumbled onto something important. Something that might, if he could figure out what it was, give him the leverage he needed to save Lincoln Elementary. In her sleek town car, Victoria Ashford stared out the window at the passing streets of Cedar Falls, her mind racing. The meeting with Ryan Mitchell had not gone as planned. She had expected him to take the money to prioritize his daughter's immediate needs over some abstract concept of community solidarity. Most people did in her experience. Everyone had a price. But Mitchell had surprised her. More than that, he had unnerved her with his direct questions and unwavering principles. It reminded her uncomfortably of another time, another life before she had become Victoria Ashford, CEO and corporate shark. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number from memory. It's me, she said when the call connected. We have a problem. Mitchell isn't going to back down. She listened to the response, her fingers tapping an impatient rhythm against the leather seat. No, I don't want him handled that way. Just keep an eye on him. Find out what he knows or thinks he knows, and accelerate the timeline. I want demolition to begin immediately after the hearing, before they have time to organize any further resistance. Another pause as the person on the other end spoke. I'm well aware of the risks, Victoria snapped. Just do as I say and pull up everything we have on Ryan Mitchell. There's something about him, something familiar that I can't quite place. She ended the call and leaned her head back against the seat, suddenly exhausted. The watch on her wrist, a sleek, expensive timepiece that probably cost more than Ryan Mitchell made in 6 months, felt unexpectedly heavy. She glanced at it, noting the late hour, and closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them again, she had made a decision. There was something she needed to see for herself, something that couldn't wait until morning. Change of plans, she instructed her driver. Take me to Cedar Falls Memorial Cemetery. The driver's eyes met hers in the rearview mirror, curious but too professional to ask questions. Yes, Ms. Ashford, right away. As the car changed direction, heading toward the outskirts of town where the cemetery lay, Victoria pulled out her tablet and opened a file labeled Mitchell H. The photograph that appeared showed a woman in her early 30s with blonde hair and striking blue eyes, eyes that Victoria had seen again that evening, reflected in a child's crayon drawing on a refrigerator door. Helen Mitchell, Victoria murmured, studying the face on the screen. What exactly were you to my father? Tuesday morning dawned clear and cold, a perfect October day in Cedar Falls. Ryan stood in front of the bathroom mirror, adjusting the tie he rarely wore, navy blue with subtle gray stripes, a Father's Day gift from Grace the year before Helen died. His reflection looked unfamiliar. The formal clothes, a costume that didn't quite fit the man he'd become. You look handsome, Daddy, Grace said from the doorway, already dressed for school in her favorite blue jumper. Like when you and Mommy used to go to fancy places. Ryan smiled, though the memory brought both warmth and pain. Thank you, sweetheart. I've got that meeting at City Hall today. Remember, the one about your school? Grace nodded solemnly. Are you going to save it? The simple faith in her voice made Ryan's throat tighten. I'm going to try my best. Mrs. Henderson says grown-ups don't always listen to what kids need, Grace said, twisting a strand of blonde hair around her finger, a habit she'd developed after Helen's death. She says sometimes money talks louder than people. Ryan knelt down to her eye level, struck once again by how much she looked like Helen, the same determined set to her jaw, the same penetrating gaze that seemed to see right through pretense. That might be true sometimes, he admitted, but that doesn't mean we stop trying to make them listen. Your mom used to say that doing the right thing matters even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Grace's face brightened at the mention of Helen. I remember, she used to say that when I didn't want to share my toys with Lizzie next door. Ryan laughed, grateful for the moment of lightness. That's right. Now let's get your breakfast so we're not late. As they ate their cereal, still without milk, another luxury that would have to wait until payday, Ryan went over his notes for the hearing one last time. The case against the Lincoln Heights project was strong in terms of community impact, but weak in terms of legal standing. Ashford Industries had followed the letter of the law, if not its spirit, securing all the necessary permits and zoning changes through technically legal, if morally questionable means. His phone buzzed with a text from Diane confirming that she and several other parents would meet him at City Hall. They'd spent the weekend organizing, gathering signatures for a petition and preparing their statements for the public comment portion of the hearing. It wasn't much, but it was all they had. After dropping Grace at school, Ryan drove downtown, parking several blocks from City Hall, to avoid the exorbitant parking fees closer to the government buildings. As he walked, he couldn't shake the memory of Victoria Ashford standing in his apartment, offering him a way out, a bribe thinly disguised as compassion. The encounter had kept him awake much of the night, not just because of the offer itself, but because of that brief moment when her mask had slipped, when she'd said he reminded her of someone she used to know. There had been something in her eyes then, something human beneath the corporate shark exterior. It didn't excuse her actions or change his determination to fight the Lincoln Heights project, but it had planted a seed of curiosity that he couldn't quite dismiss. The steps of City Hall were already crowded when Ryan arrived. Parents from Lincoln Elementary held handmade signs, "Save our school," "Community over corporations." People before profits. News vans from local stations were setting up reporters doing stand-ups with the protesters as background. Ryan spotted Diane and made his way over to her. "Bigger turnout than we expected," she said by way of greeting, her expression a mixture of hope and anxiety. "The hearing room only holds 100 people. They're giving out numbered tickets for the public comment portion." Ryan nodded, scanning the crowd. "Any sign of Ashford representatives?" "Not yet, but I'd bet good money they'll arrive at the last minute, make their presentation, and leave without having to listen to any of us actually affected by their project." Inside, the city council chambers were already nearly full. Ryan and Diane managed to find seats near the back, just as a side door opened and a group of suit-clad individuals entered. Ryan immediately recognized Victoria Ashford, looking every inch the corporate CEO, in a tailored charcoal suit, her blonde hair once again pulled back in that severe bun. Behind her came Thomas Harrington, the man Ryan had seen in the Ashford lobby, along with several others carrying briefcases and tablets. Victoria's gaze swept the room, pausing briefly when it landed on Ryan. Something flickered across her face, recognition perhaps, or annoyance, before she turned away, taking a seat at the table reserved for presenters. The hearing proceeded with mind-numbing bureaucratic efficiency. First came the presentation from the city planning department, full of technical jargon about zoning classifications and development parameters. Then Victoria rose to present the Ashford Industries proposal. Her voice was clear and commanding as she outlined the supposed benefits of the Lincoln Heights Galleria job creation, increased tax revenue, economic revitalization. She spoke of urban renewal and modernization, never once mentioning the families who would be displaced, the community that would be destroyed, or the children who would lose their school. The Lincoln Heights project represents a $500 million investment in Cedar Falls. She concluded, her tone suggesting that only a fool would question such generosity. "We're not just building a shopping center, we're building a future for this city, one that embraces progress rather than clinging to outdated structures and inefficient land use." Ryan felt his hands clenching into fists as Victoria returned to her seat, accepting a congratulatory nod from Harrington. The way she spoke about their neighborhood, their lives, as if they were nothing more than obstacles to be cleared away in the name of progress, it made his blood boil. Finally, the public comment portion began. Diane was called first, her voice shaking slightly as she described what Lincoln Elementary meant to her daughter, how the school had become a safe harbor after her divorce. Others followed, parents, teachers, small business owners from the neighborhood, all pleading for the city council to reconsider the project. Ryan's number was called last. As he approached the podium, he was acutely aware of Victoria watching him, her expression coolly interested, as if he were some mildly entertaining specimen under a microscope. "My name is Ryan Mitchell," he began, his voice steadier than he'd expected. "My daughter Grace is a second grader at Lincoln Elementary. 2 years ago, she lost her mother to cancer. In the months that followed, when Grace barely spoke, barely ate, barely seemed alive herself, it was Lincoln Elementary that helped save her," her teacher, Miss Vaughns. "Carter stayed after school every day for weeks working with Grace on art projects, because that was the only time my daughter would smile. The school counselor met with her during lunch periods, helping her process a grief no 7-year-old should have to face." Ryan paused, glancing down at his notes, but finding that he didn't need them. The words came from somewhere deeper than his prepared statement. "Lincoln isn't just a school. It's not just a building that can be demolished and replaced with something shinier or more profitable. It's a community. It's people who care about each other, who look out for each other's children, who understand that some things are worth more than money." He looked directly at Victoria, now meeting her gaze without flinching. "The representatives from Ashford Industries speak about progress and economic growth. But I have to ask, progress for whom, growth for whom? Certainly not for the 300 children who will lose their school. Not for the elderly residents who've lived in that neighborhood for 50 years and can't afford to relocate. Not for the small business owners who serve our community and will be pushed out by corporate chains." Ryan felt a strange sense of calm settle over him, a certainty that regardless of the outcome, this moment mattered. That standing here speaking these truths was necessary. "I'm not naive. I understand that companies like Ashford Industries have advantages in these situations, money, lawyers, political connections. But that doesn't make what they're doing right. And it doesn't mean we should accept it without a fight." He turned to address the city council directly. "You have a choice today. You can choose profits over people, or you can choose to stand with your constituents, the families who elected you, the children who depend on you, the community that trusts you to represent their interests. I'm asking you to make the right choice. Not the easy one, not the profitable one, but the right one. As Ryan returned to his seat, a ripple of applause spread through the chamber, quickly silenced by the council president's gavel. Victoria's expression remained impassive, but Ryan noticed that she was gripping her pen so tightly her knuckles had turned white. The hearing concluded with the council announcing they would take the matter under advisement and issue a decision within 30 days. It was a delaying tactic. Everyone knew a way to let the public outrage cool while still ultimately approving the project. But it was also 30 more days for the community to organize, to strategize, to fight. As people began filing out of the chamber, Ryan found himself face to face with Victoria, who had moved to intercept him near the exit. "Quite the passionate speech, Mr. Mitchell," she said, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "Though I notice you didn't mention my visit to your apartment, or my offer." "Some things aren't for sale," Ryan replied simply. Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly. "Everything has a price, Mr. Mitchell. It's just a matter of finding the right number." "Not everything, not everyone." A strange expression crossed Victoria's face, almost like genuine curiosity. "You actually believe that, don't you? Despite all evidence to the contrary." Before Ryan could respond, Thomas Harrington appeared at Victoria's elbow, his aristocratic features arranged in an expression of mild disdain as he looked Ryan over. "Victoria, we have that meeting across town," he reminded her, not bothering to acknowledge Ryan directly. "And I believe we've wasted enough time on this charade." Victoria hesitated, her gaze still locked with Ryan's. For a moment, he thought she might say something more, but then the corporate mask slipped back into place and she gave a slight nod. "Of course, Thomas. Mr. Mitchell, I'm sure we'll be seeing each other again." As they walked away, Ryan overheard Harrington's next words delivered with unmistakable contempt. "I don't understand why you're bothering with these people, Victoria. The project is approved. The timeline is set. Let the PR department handle the fallout." Victoria's response was too quiet to catch, but something in her posture, a slight stiffening of her shoulders, suggested that perhaps she and Harrington weren't entirely aligned on how to handle the situation. Outside City Hall, Ryan rejoined Diane and the other parents who were already discussing next steps: a protest march, a media campaign, a fundraiser to hire a lawyer specializing in community action lawsuits. Their energy was infectious, their determination, a reminder that even in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds, people could come together and fight for what mattered. "You were amazing in there, Ryan," Diane said, squeezing his arm. "The way you spoke about Grace in the school, I saw at least 2 council members actually paying attention instead of checking their phones." Ryan smiled, though he couldn't share her optimism. He'd seen the practiced indifference on most of the council members' faces, the way they'd avoided eye contact with the speakers, the subtle deference they showed to the Ashford representatives. "Thanks, but I think we need more than good speeches at this point. We need something concrete, something that could actually stop this project." "Like what?" Ryan shook his head. "I don't know yet, but I'm going to keep looking." After promising to attend the planning meeting for the protest march that weekend, Ryan headed to his truck. He had just enough time to pick up Grace from school before heading to his afternoon jobs, a residential rewiring in the morning, and an office building lighting upgrade that would likely take him into the evening. As he approached his truck, he noticed a figure leaning against it, a woman in her mid-30s with short dark hair and a serious expression. She straightened as he drew closer, revealing a press badge hanging around her neck. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm Emma Chen from the Cedar Falls Gazette. I'd like to talk to you about your comments at the hearing today." Ryan hesitated, wary of speaking to the press without the other parents present. "I'm not sure I have anything to add beyond what I said in there." "Actually, I'm more interested in what you didn't say," Emma replied, her tone sharpening his attention. "Like how Victoria Ashford visited your apartment last night to offer you a special relocation package if you'd stay away from today's hearing." Ryan stared at her, genuinely shocked. "How could you possibly know about that?" Emma smiled slightly. "I have my sources. So it's true then. I'm not confirming or denying anything, and I'm late to pick up my daughter." "Fair enough. But perhaps you'd be interested in some other information my sources have uncovered. about the real purpose of the Lincoln Heights project. Despite his better judgment, Ryan found himself intrigued. What do you mean, real purpose? Not here, Emma said, glancing around the crowded street. Meet me at Riverside Park, near the boat launch at 7 Ho Street tonight. I'll have documents you'll want to see. Before Ryan could respond, she handed him a business card and walked away, disappearing into the flow of pedestrians on the sidewalk. Ryan examined the card, Emma Chen, investigative reporter, Cedar Falls Gazette. It seemed legitimate, but something about the encounter felt off. How had she known about Victoria's visit? Who were these sources she mentioned, and why the cloak and dagger routine with meeting at the park instead of the newspaper office? His instincts told him to ignore the invitation to focus on the community organizing efforts already underway. But if there really was something more to the Lincoln Heights project, something beyond the official story Ashford Industries was telling, it could be the leverage they needed. The question was whether the information was real and whether the risk was worth it. Ryan arrived at Riverside Park at 7:05, having left Grace with Mrs. Abernathy after explaining he had an urgent work call. The October evening was already dark, the park mostly empty except for a few joggers and dog walkers taking advantage of the Riverside Path's lights. The boat launch area was particularly quiet, a small wooden dock extending into the Cedar River, illuminated only by a single lamppost. As Ryan approached, he spotted Emma Chen sitting on a bench near the water, a manila envelope in her hands. "You came," she said, looking up as he approached. "I wasn't sure you would." "I almost didn't," Ryan admitted, taking a seat beside her, but maintaining a careful distance. "I'm still not convinced this isn't some kind of setup." Emma smiled thinly. "Healthy skepticism. I'd expect nothing less after what you've been through." She handed him the envelope. "Take a look. These are copies, so you can keep them." Ryan opened the envelope and pulled out several documents. In the dim light, it was difficult to make out all the details, but he could see that they appeared to be internal Ashford Industries memos and reports. The first was labeled Lincoln Heights Environmental Assessment, Internal Use Only. "Where did you get these?" he asked, leafing through the papers. "As I said, I have sources. People inside Ashford who aren't comfortable with what's happening. People who believe the public deserves to know the truth." Ryan frowned, skimming the document. Much of it was technical language about soil composition and groundwater assessments, but certain phrases jumped out: elevated toxicity levels, containment challenges, potential liability exposure. "What am I looking at here?" Emma leaned closer, pointing to a highlighted section. "This is the real reason Ashford wants that land. 20 years ago, before environmental regulations were as strict, there was a chemical processing plant on the eastern edge of what's now the Lincoln Elementary grounds. When it closed, they didn't properly dispose of all the waste. Some of it leached into the soil." Ryan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October air. "Are you saying the school is built on contaminated land?" "Not exactly. The contamination is mostly contained in a specific area near the old plant foundation, which is now part of the undeveloped wooded area behind the school. The school itself tested clean when it was built, but Ashford's more extensive testing has found that the contamination is slowly spreading. In another few years, it could reach the school grounds." Ryan turned the page, finding a map with colored zones indicating different levels of contamination. The school building itself was indeed in a clean zone, but the edge of a yellow caution zone extended to within 100 yards of the playground. If this is true, why wouldn't Ashford just reveal it? They could position themselves as saving the neighborhood rather than destroying it. Emma's expression turned grim. Because the company that originally owned that chemical plant, it was Harrington Chemical, as in Thomas Harrington, who's now Ashford's second-in-command and largest shareholder after Victoria herself. If the contamination becomes public knowledge, he'd be legally liable for a massive cleanup operation and potentially hundreds of millions in damages to affected residents. Ryan stared at her, pieces falling into place. So instead, they buy the whole neighborhood, bulldoze it, and cap the contamination during construction of the new mall. No one ever knows it was there. Exactly. The cleanup is disguised as normal site preparation. The liability goes away, and they make a fortune on the new development in the process. This is criminal," Ryan said, his voice tight with anger. "They're knowingly putting children at risk to protect their profits." "That's why my source came to me," Emma confirmed, "and why I came to you. You've become something of a voice for the Lincoln community. People listen to you." Ryan looked down at the documents again, trying to process the implications. If what Emma was saying was true, it changed everything about the fight against the Lincoln Heights project. It wasn't just about saving a school or preserving a community anymore. It was about exposing a cover-up that put children's health at risk. "I need to verify this," he said finally. "These could be fake or misinterpreted." Emma nodded. "I understand. I've been working on verification myself. My source is attempting to get me access to the original soil testing data. In the meantime, I'd suggest you look into Harrington's history with the chemical company. It's not exactly a secret, though it's not something he advertises either." She stood adjusting her jacket against the evening chill. "One more thing you should know. Victoria Ashford may not be fully aware of the extent of the contamination. According to my source, Harrington has been controlling the flow of information, giving her only what she needs to know to move the project forward." Ryan frowned, remembering the tension he'd observed between Victoria and Harrington outside the hearing. Why would he keep her in the dark? She's the CEO. Because Victoria Ashford has one weakness that Thomas Harrington doesn't. Occasionally, she shows signs of having a conscience. And Harrington can't afford for that conscience to interfere with covering up his family's environmental crimes. After Emma left, Ryan remained on the bench for a long time, staring at the dark water of the Cedar River. The documents in his lap represented either a breakthrough in their fight against the Lincoln Heights project or an elaborate deception. He wasn't sure which yet, but he knew he needed to find out, and quickly. The next morning, Ryan called in a favor with a friend who worked at the county records office. Ben Harrison had been 2 years behind Ryan in high school, and Ryan had rewired his mother's house at cost when the original wiring had caused a small fire. Ben was more than happy to help Ryan navigate the labyrinthine property record system. "Harrington Chemical, you said?" Ben asked, typing on his keyboard. "Yeah, here it is. Owned that parcel from 1985 to 2003 when it was sold to a company called Bluestone Development. Bluestone held it for about a year, then sold it to the school district." "Bluestone Development." Ryan repeated the name, striking a chord. "Can you find out who owned that company?" Ben clicked through a few more screens. It was dissolved in 2005, but the listed owner was, interesting, Edward Ashford, Victoria's father. "I guess so. There's a note here about the sale to the school district being contested by someone, but the case was dismissed." Ben squinted at the screen. The plaintiff was Thomas Harrington, representing Harrington Chemical. Ryan felt a surge of excitement. The connections were real, at least. Harrington had owned the chemical plant. Edward Ashford, through a short-lived development company, had acquired the property and sold it to the school district, and Harrington had tried to block that sale. "Is there any record of environmental testing before the school was built?" Ryan asked. Ben shook his head. "Not here. That would be with the Environmental Protection Department or maybe the school district's records. But those wouldn't be digitized for something that old." Ryan thanked Ben for his help and left the records office with more questions than answers. The connection between Harrington, the chemical plant, and the Lincoln Elementary property was real, but he still had no proof of actual contamination or a cover-up. His next stop was the Cedar Falls Public Library, where he spent hours researching Harrington Chemical and environmental regulations from the 1990s and early 2000s. What he found painted a disturbing picture. Harrington Chemical had been cited multiple times for environmental violations at various facilities across the country. They'd paid fines but never admitted wrongdoing. And in 2003, around the time they sold the Cedar Falls property, they'd undergone a major corporate restructuring that appeared designed to shield assets from liability. By the time Ryan left the library, he was convinced that Emma's documents were genuine, or at least based on real concerns. But he still needed more concrete evidence if he was going to take this public, especially given the powerful interests involved. He was so absorbed in his thoughts that he almost collided with someone on the library steps. Looking up, he found himself face to face with Melanie Ward, Victoria Ashford's executive assistant. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, looking as surprised as he felt. "What a coincidence." Ryan doubted it was a coincidence at all. "Mr. Ward, are you following me now?" Melanie's expression remained professional, but something in her eyes suggested discomfort. "Not at all. I was just returning some books." She held up a canvas bag that did indeed contain several books. "But since we've run into each other, there's something I've been wanting to tell you." She glanced around, then lowered her voice. "Ms. Ashford would like to meet with you, privately, to discuss a possible compromise regarding Lincoln Elementary." Ryan stared at her, caught off guard by the unexpected overture. A compromise? Your boss made it pretty clear at the hearing that the project is moving forward as planned. Things have evolved since then. She asked me to give you this. Melanie handed him a business card with a handwritten note on the back. Tomorrow, 8 p.m., Riverside Bistro. Come alone. VA. Why the secrecy? Why not just call me? Melanie hesitated. Mrs. Ashford prefers to keep certain discussions off the record, especially when they involve potential departures from officially approved plans. Ryan studied her face, trying to determine if this was a genuine olive branch or another attempt at manipulation. And if I don't come, that's entirely your choice. But I would suggest that hearing what she has to say could be beneficial to your cause. With that, Melanie nodded politely and continued down the steps, leaving Ryan holding the card and wondering what Victoria Ashford could possibly want to discuss that required such cloak and dagger arrangements. That evening, as Ryan helped Grace with her homework at their kitchen table, his mind kept returning to the environmental documents, the property records, and now Victoria's mysterious dinner invitation. Something bigger was happening here, something beyond a simple corporate land grab for a shopping mall. Daddy, you're not listening, Grace complained, poking his arm with her pencil. I asked if 32 divided by 8 is 4. Sorry, sweetheart. Yes, that's right. Ryan refocused on the math worksheet, pushing the Lincoln Heights mysteries aside for the moment. Let's try the next one. After Grace was in bed, Ryan called Diane to update her on what he'd learned about the property's history, though he left out the part about the potential contamination until he had more concrete evidence. He also mentioned Victoria's dinner invitation. It's obviously a trap, Diane said immediately. She's trying to isolate you from the rest of us. Divide and conquer. Maybe, Ryan conceded. But what if it's not? What if there's actually room for negotiation? Diane sighed. Ryan, I know you want to believe there's a solution here that works for everyone. But corporations like Ashford don't compromise unless they're forced to. They don't suddenly develop consciences mid-project. People aren't corporations, though. Victoria Ashford might be the CEO, but she's still a person, and people can change their minds. Well, you really believe that after the way she talked about our neighborhood at the hearing, after she came to your apartment to try to buy you off? Ryan didn't have a good answer. The truth was, he didn't know what to believe anymore. The Victoria Ashford who had mocked Helen's watch and threatened him in his own apartment seemed incapable of genuine compromise. But there had been those moments, brief flashes of something else beneath the corporate facade. And now this dinner invitation arranged in secret, suggesting a willingness to depart from officially approved plans. I think I need to go, he said finally. If there's even a small chance of saving the school, I have to train. Diane was quiet for a moment. Just be careful, Ryan, and keep your phone on record the whole time. I don't trust that woman as far as I could throw her Maserati. The next day passed in a blur of work and worry. Ryan had a full schedule of electrical jobs, which at least kept his hands busy, if not his mind. By the time he dropped Grace off with Mrs. Abernathy for the evening, explaining that he had a meeting about saving her school, his nerves were stretched thin with anticipation and uncertainty. Riverside Bistro was one of Cedar Falls' more upscale restaurants, the kind of place Ryan hadn't been to since before Helen got sick. He felt distinctly out of place as he gave his name to the maitre d', who led him through the elegant dining room to a private alcove in the mouth partially screened from the rest of the restaurant by a decorative wooden partition. Victoria Ashford was already seated, a glass of red wine in front of her. She looked different than she had at the hearing or in his apartment, more relaxed somehow. Her hair loose around her shoulders, wearing a simple black dress rather than her usual corporate armor. She glanced up as Ryan approached, her expression unreadable. Mr. Mitchell, thank you for coming. Ryan took the seat across from her, acutely aware of the contrast between his work clothes, the nicest he owned, but still clearly not designed for establishments like this, and the understated luxury of her attire. Your assistant made it sound important, he replied, declining the waiter's offer of wine with a shake of his head. Something about a compromise. Victoria waited until the waiter had retreated before responding. I've been reviewing our plans for Lincoln Heights. In light of the passionate community response, I'm considering some modifications that might address some of your concerns. Ryan studied her face, looking for signs of the cold corporate predator he'd encountered in the basement. Instead, he found something more complex calculation, yes, but also what appeared to be genuine consideration. What kind of modifications? We could preserve the school building itself, Victoria offered. Incorporate it into the development as a community center or educational facility of some kind. The children would still need to relocate to Harrison Elementary, but the building and its history would remain intact. Ryan frowned. The building isn't what matters. It's the community, the teachers, the students, the programs. You can't preserve that by keeping an empty shell and filling it with shops. Victoria took a sip of her wine, her eyes never leaving his face. What if we built a new school first before demolishing the old one? On the western edge of the development, with state-of-the-art facilities large enough to accommodate all the current students, plus room for growth. The offer was unexpected and admittedly better than Ryan had anticipated, but something about it felt wrong, like a magician's misdirection. And the rest of the neighborhood, the homes, the small businesses? Victoria's expression tightened slightly. The residential and commercial zones would still need to be cleared for the main development, but with adequate relocation assistance. Which means the community still gets destroyed, Ryan interrupted, just with a shiny new school building as a consolation prize. Victoria leaned forward, her voice taking on an edge of frustration. Mr. Mitchell, I'm trying to find a middle ground here. Ashford Industries has invested millions in planning and preparation for this project. The board will not simply walk away from it. This is a significant concession. Ryan considered her words, weighing them against what he'd learned about the property's history and the potential contamination. If Harrington was hiding information from Victoria, as Emma had suggested, then perhaps this dinner was more complicated than a simple negotiation tactic. "Why are you really doing this?" he asked, changing tack. "The compromise, the secret meeting. This isn't normal corporate procedure." Victoria seemed taken aback by the directness of the question. She picked up her wine glass, then set it down without drinking, a small gesture that nonetheless revealed uncharacteristic uncertainty. "I've been reevaluating certain aspects of the project and certain assumptions I've made." "What assumptions?" Victoria studied him for a long moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. "Do you know why I had you investigated, Mr. Mitchell, before you came to work on the electrical systems in our West building?" Ryan shook his head, confused by the apparent change of subject. "Your name appeared in my father's personal files. Files I inherited when he died 5 years ago. He had a note about helping with medical expenses for a Helen Mitchell. I was curious about the connection." Ryan felt as if the air had been sucked from his lungs. "What? That's impossible. My wife never met your father." Victoria reached into a small handbag beside her and withdrew a photograph, sliding it across the table. "Are you sure about that?" Ryan stared at the photo in disbelief. It showed Edward Ashford, an older man with Victoria's same blonde hair and sharp features, sitting in what appeared to be a hospital room. Beside him, checking something on a medical chart, was Helen, unmistakably Helen, with her blue eyes and gentle smile, wearing scrubs and a badge that identified her as a nurse at Cedar Falls Memorial Hospital. "This was taken about 8 years ago," Victoria said quietly. "My father had his first heart attack that year. He was at Cedar Falls Memorial for 2 weeks. According to his journals, your wife was his primary nurse." Ryan picked up the photo with trembling hands, his mind racing to process this unexpected connection. Helen had worked at Memorial, certainly, but she'd never mentioned caring for Edward Ashford, one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in Cedar Falls. "I don't understand," he said finally. "What does this have to do with Lincoln Heights? With you showing up at my apartment or inviting me here tonight?" Victoria's expression softened, revealing a vulnerability he hadn't seen before. "My father changed after that hospital stay. He'd always been driven, ambitious, sometimes ruthless in business. But something happened during those 2 weeks. In his journals, he wrote about conversations with Nurse Helen that made him reconsider his priorities, his legacy." She took a deep breath, as if the next words were difficult to say. "The land where Lincoln Elementary now stands. My father's company bought it from Harrington Chemical and sold it to the school district at a significant loss. It was one of his last major decisions before stepping back from day-to-day operations due to his health. At the time, I thought it was a sign of weakness, a sentimental mistake." Ryan's mind was reeling. The connections were too strange, too coincidental. Helen caring for Edward Ashford, Ashford buying the contaminated property from Harrington and then selling it to the school district. And now, years later, Victoria Ashford and Thomas Harrington trying to buy it back. Your father knew the land was contaminated, Ryan said, the pieces falling into place. He bought it to keep Harrington from developing it without proper cleanup. And he sold it to the school district because the law required more thorough environmental testing for school sites than for commercial development, Victoria finished. Yes, at least that's what I've recently come to suspect. My father never explicitly mentioned contamination in his journals, but there are references to Harrington's mess and protecting the future. Ryan sat back trying to process the implications of what Victoria was revealing. If Edward Ashford had known about the contamination and sold the land to the school district to force proper testing and cleanup, it would explain why Harrington had contested the sale. It would also explain why he was now so eager to reacquire the property and develop it before the contamination spread further and became impossible to hide. Does Harrington know that you know about this? Ryan asked, suddenly concerned for Victoria's safety as well as his own. Victoria's expression darkened. No, and I'd prefer to keep it that way until I understand exactly what happened and what we're dealing with now. Harrington has been pushing hard for this project from the beginning. He's the one who identified the site, who convinced the board it was ideal for the Galleria concept. I never questioned why he was so fixated on that specific location until I found my father's journals last week. A heavy silence fell between them as Ryan contemplated the strange twist of fate that had connected his wife to Victoria's father and now connected him to Victoria herself in this high-stakes conflict over Lincoln Heights. "What are you going to do?" he asked finally. Victoria's gaze was direct, her voice steadier now. "I'm going to find out exactly what Harrington is hiding. And then I'm going to decide whether Lincoln Heights proceeds as planned, is modified, or is canceled entirely. And in the meantime, the hearing was just a formality. Construction is scheduled to start in less than a month. I can delay the project for at least 60 days without raising too many questions. After that, it becomes more difficult." Ryan nodded, understanding the implied timeline. 2 months to uncover the truth about the contamination, about Harrington's involvement, about what Edward Ashford had known and done 8 years ago. "Why tell me all this?" he asked. "Why not just delay the project and conduct your investigation privately?" Victoria's expression turned wry. "Because you're not going to stop fighting, are you? You and your community group will keep protesting, keep generating media attention, keep demanding answers. And that complicates my ability to investigate discreetly. So this is about damage control." "Partly," Victoria admitted, "but it's also because I think you actually care about doing the right thing regardless of the cost, and that's rare in my experience." She reached across the table, not quite touching his hand, but close enough that he could see the fine tremor in her fingers. "I'm not asking you to trust me, Mr. Mitchell. I'm asking for time. 60 days to find out what's really happening with that land, with Harrington, with my father's legacy. In return, I'll share whatever I discover with you, and we'll decide together how to proceed." Yes, so Ryan was struck by the unexpectedness of her proposal. Not a bribe, not a threat, but a tentative alliance. It was the last thing he'd expected when he walked into the restaurant. "And if I refuse, if we keep fighting publicly, then I'll still investigate, but I'll do it while managing a PR crisis and dealing with board pressure to move forward regardless. It will be harder, slower, and less likely to result in the outcome I suspect we both want. Which is the truth," Victoria said simply, "and whatever action that truth demands." Ryan considered her offer. Everything in his experience told him not to trust Victoria Ashford, the woman who had mocked his grief and threatened his community. But the photograph of Helen with Edward Ashford changed things. If Helen had somehow influenced the elder Ashford's decision to purchase and repurpose that land, if her compassion had reached even a wealthy, powerful man at the end of his career, then perhaps there was hope for finding common ground with his daughter as well. 60 days, Ryan said finally, "but I need something concrete to take back to the community group, something to justify pausing our efforts." Victoria nodded. "I'll issue a public statement tomorrow announcing a comprehensive review of the Lincoln Heights project with specific attention to community impact and alternative approaches. I'll commit to no demolition or construction activity for at least 60 days while the review is conducted. And Harrington, he won't just accept this delay." A cold smile flickered across Victoria's face, a reminder that beneath the unexpected vulnerability, she was still a formidable corporate executive. Leave Harrington to me. He may be a board member, but I'm still the CEO. As they finalized the details of their unusual agreement, Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that he was making a deal with the devil, or at least with someone whose interests might ultimately prove incompatible with his own. But the connection to Helen, the possibility that she had unknowingly set these events in motion years ago, made it impossible for him to simply walk away. When he finally left the restaurant, the October night air cool against his face, Ryan found himself looking up at the stars and wondering what Helen would think of all this. Would she approve of his tentative alliance with Victoria Ashford? Would she understand his willingness to pause the public fight in exchange for a chance at a more comprehensive victory? He couldn't know for certain, but he could almost hear her voice, calm and practical as always. Sometimes the right path isn't the obvious one. Sometimes you have to trust that kindness will find its way back to you, even from unexpected sources. With that thought providing some measure of comfort, Ryan headed home, unaware that his agreement with Victoria had just set in motion events that would test both of them in ways neither could anticipate. The next morning dawned gray and drizzly, matching Ryan's uncertain mood as he prepared Grace for school. He'd spent a restless night considering his conversation with Victoria, weighing the risks and potential benefits of their agreement. By morning, he still wasn't entirely sure he'd made the right choice, but he was committed to seeing it through. "You look tired, Daddy," Grace observed as she munched her toast. "Did you have bad dreams?" Ryan smiled, amazed as always by his daughter's perceptiveness. "Just a lot on my mind, sweetheart. Grown-up stuff about your school." Grace nodded solemnly. "Ms. Carter says grown-ups have to make hard choices sometimes, but it's important to choose what's right, not what's easy." The echo of Helen's philosophy in their daughter's words brought a lump to Ryan's throat. "That's very wise. Did Ms. Carter tell you that?" "No," Grace said, her blue eyes. Helen's eyes regarding him seriously. "Mommy did. I remember." Ryan swallowed hard, reaching across the table to squeeze her small hand. "She was right, and we're going to make sure we make the right choices about your school." "Okay." Grace nodded, apparently satisfied, and returned to her breakfast. Ryan watched her, marveling at the resilience of children, at their ability to carry forward the wisdom of those they'd lost, while still embracing the present moment with full hearts. His phone buzzed with a text from Diane. "Emergency meeting at my place, 9 a.m. Major development with Ashford." Ryan frowned, wondering if Victoria had already issued her promised statement about reviewing the Lincoln Heights project. It seemed fast, given their conversation had only ended a few hours ago. After dropping Grace at school, he headed to Diane's small bungalow on the eastern edge of the Lincoln Heights neighborhood. Several cars were already parked outside, and when Diane answered the door, her expression was a mixture of excitement and concern. "You're not going to believe this," she said, leading him into her living room, where a half-dozen other parents and community members were gathered around a laptop. "Emma Chen from the Gazette sent this over an hour ago. It's going live on their website at noon." Ryan leaned over to see the screen, which displayed a draft news article with the headline, "Breaking Ashford Industries, CEO announces comprehensive review of Lincoln Heights project." The article quoted a statement from Victoria nearly identical to what she'd promised Ryan the night before: a full review of the project, no demolition or construction for at least 60 days, and a commitment to exploring alternative approaches that would better address community concerns. "This is unexpected," one of the other parents said, clearly skeptical. "Why would she suddenly change course like this?" "It's a delay tactic," another suggested. "They're hoping we'll lose momentum, that public interest will fade." "Or they've found a problem with the project," Diane countered. "Something that requires fixing before they can proceed." Ryan remained silent, uncomfortable with his insider knowledge, yet unwilling to break his agreement with Victoria by revealing their conversation. Instead, he studied the full statement, looking for any discrepancies or hidden meanings. "What do you think, Ryan?" Diane asked, drawing him into the discussion. "You spoke at the hearing. Do you think this is genuine?" Ryan chose his words carefully. "I think it gives us time, which is what we needed. Whether it's genuine or not, we can use these 60 days to build stronger opposition, gather more information, and prepare legal challenges if necessary." The others nodded, seemingly satisfied with his assessment. As the discussion turned to organizing a community meeting to discuss this new development, Ryan's phone buzzed again, an unknown number this time. Stepping into Diane's kitchen for privacy, he answered cautiously. Hello. Mr. Mitchell, this is Melanie Ward. Victoria's assistant's voice was tense, almost whispering. I need to speak with you urgently. In person. It's about Ms. Ashford and the Lincoln Heights situation. I just saw the statement about the project review. Isn't that what we discussed last night? Yes, but there's been a complication. Ms. Ashford collapsed this morning at the office. She's been taken to Cedar Falls Memorial Hospital. Ryan felt a cold knot form in his stomach. What happened? Is she all right? The doctors are saying it's exhaustion and dehydration, but Melanie paused, her voice dropping even lower. I found her office in disarray. Papers everywhere, her computer screen smashed, and a note on her desk that just said, Mitchell, danger. I think she was trying to warn you about something. Harrington, Ryan said, the name escaping before he could stop himself. Did he have access to her office last night or this morning? Mr. Harrington has access to the entire building, Melanie confirmed. But why would he? What's going on, Mr. Mitchell? Ryan's mind was racing, trying to process this new development. If Victoria had collapsed or been made to collapse shortly after their meeting, it suggested that perhaps Harrington had discovered their conversation or Victoria's investigation into the contamination issue. I need to see her, he said, making a decision. Which hospital? Which room? Cedar Falls Memorial, room 412. But Mr. Mitchell, be careful. Security reported a man watching the hospital entrance. Someone they didn't recognize who left when approached. The warning sent another chill through Ryan. This was escalating from a community dispute over a development project into something much darker. Thank you for calling, Melanie. Please don't tell anyone else that you've contacted me. After hanging up, Ryan rejoined the group in Diane's living room, his mind working furiously to formulate a plan. He needed to get to the hospital to see Victoria and find out what she'd discovered that had potentially put both of them in danger. But he also needed to ensure Grace's safety, especially if Harrington or someone working for him was targeting people connected to the Lincoln Heights opposition. I need to go, he announced, interrupting the ongoing discussion. Something's come up with a client. Diane, can I talk to you privately for a minute? In Diane's hallway, away from the others, Ryan kept his voice low. I need a favor, a big one. Can Grace stay with you today after school? Maybe overnight. Diane's eyebrows rose in surprise. Of course, but what's going on? You look like you've seen a ghost. Ryan hesitated, torn between his promise to Victoria and his need to protect his friends. I can't explain everything right now, but I think there might be something dangerous happening with the Lincoln Heights situation. Something beyond a normal development dispute. Diane's expression shifted from surprise to concern. Ryan, what have you gotten yourself into? Hopefully a chance to save the school and the neighborhood. But I need to know Grace is safe while I figure it out. Diane studied his face for a moment, then nodded. Okay, I'll pick her up from school and bring her here. Sarah will be thrilled to have a sleepover. But you have to promise to call me tonight and explain what's really going on. Ryan agreed, grateful for Diane's trust and friendship. As he left her house and headed for his truck, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was stepping into something far more complicated and dangerous than a fight to save a neighborhood school. The connection between Helen and Edward Ashford, the contaminated land, Harrington's determination to develop the property, and now Victoria's collapse. It all pointed to stakes much higher than he'd initially understood. Pulling out his phone, he called Mrs. Abernathy, explaining that Grace would be staying with her friend Sarah that night and asking her to let Grace know if she stopped by the apartment. Then, with a deep breath to steady his nerves, Ryan headed for Cedar Falls Memorial Hospital, the place where 8 years earlier his wife had apparently set in motion a chain of events that was now coming full circle. Cedar Falls Memorial Hospital hadn't changed much in the 2 years since Helen's death. The same antiseptic smell hung in the air, mingling with the aroma of mediocre coffee from the cafeteria. The same fluorescent lights cast their unforgiving glow on pale green walls. Even the squeaking of rubber-soled shoes on linoleum sounded exactly as Ryan remembered it, a soundtrack to the worst days of his life. He stepped off the elevator on the 4th floor, his heart hammering against his ribs. The parallels were impossible to ignore. 2 years ago, he'd walked these same halls to visit Helen. Now he was here for Victoria Ashford, a woman who had entered his life as an enemy, but had somehow become, an ally, a co-conspirator. Something more complicated than either label could capture. The nurse's station was busy staff members moving with practiced efficiency. Ryan hesitated suddenly, unsure of his next move. A memory surfaced, Helen in her nurse's uniform, explaining her approach to difficult patients. You can't help someone who doesn't want help, but sometimes the ones who push you away the hardest are the ones who need you most. Ryan approached the nurse's station, clearing his throat. Excuse me, I'm here to see Victoria Ashford in room 412. The nurse glanced up, assessing him with the practiced eye of someone accustomed to filtering appropriate visitors from potential problems. Are you family? No, I'm a business associate, Ryan improvised, knowing that community activists fighting against her corporate development wouldn't get him through the door. The nurse looked skeptical. Ms. Ashford is under doctor's orders to rest, only family and approved visitors. Ryan's heart sank. Before he could argue further, a familiar voice spoke from behind him. It's all right, Nurse Jenkins. Mr. Mitchell is on the approved list. Ryan turned to find Melanie standing there, her professional composure slightly frayed around the edges. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her typically immaculate blouse was creased as if she'd been sitting in an uncomfortable chair for hours. She's awake, Ryan asked as the nurse reluctantly nodded her permission. In and out, Melanie replied, leading him down the hallway. The doctors say it's mostly exhaustion combined with mild dehydration, but they are running tests to rule out other causes. She's been pushing herself too hard for months. She paused outside room 412, lowering her voice. Mr. Mitchell, before you go in, she may not be what you're expecting. Victoria Ashford doesn't do vulnerability well. Just be prepared. With that cryptic warning, Melanie opened the door and gestured for Ryan to enter. The room was private. Of course, Ryan doubted Victoria would accept anything less. Muted sunlight filtered through partially closed blinds, casting soft stripes across the standard-issue hospital bed. Victoria lay against the raised mattress, an IV inserted into her left arm, a monitor quietly tracking her vital signs. Without her perfect makeup and tailored clothing, she looked younger, more human. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and the hospital gown did nothing to project the corporate power she typically wielded like a weapon. She turned as Ryan entered, her eyes widening slightly in surprise. You actually came. Ryan moved closer to the bed, uncertain of the proper protocol for this bizarre situation. Melanie called. She said you collapsed, and that you might have been trying to warn me about something. Victoria's gaze shifted to the door where Melanie hovered uncertainly. Give us a few minutes, would you, and make sure no one disturbs us. After Melanie left, closing the door behind her, Victoria attempted to sit up straighter, wincing slightly at the movement. I wasn't sure she'd contact you. Melanie has her own ideas about what's best for me, which apparently now include involving you in this mess. What happened? Ryan asked, deciding directness was the best approach. Melanie mentioned finding your office in disarray, and a note with my name on it. Victoria's expression tightened. Someone was in my office last night. After our dinner, I arrived early this morning and found my files scattered, my computer accessed. The environmental reports I'd been reviewing were missing. Harrington, almost certainly though it would be nearly impossible to prove. He has legitimate access to the building and my office for board matters. She rubbed her temple, a gesture so human and unguarded that Ryan found himself momentarily thrown off balance. I was attempting to compile what information I still had to warn you that he might know about our arrangement when I apparently collapsed. Melanie found me on the floor. Ryan moved a chair closer to the bed and sat down, processing this new information. So Harrington knows we met, and he knows you're investigating the contamination issue. It appears so, which means both of us may be in danger. Victoria's voice was matter-of-fact, as if discussing a mild inconvenience rather than a potentially life-threatening situation. Thomas Harrington has built his entire career on burying the environmental crimes of his family's company. He won't let anyone expose them now, not even me. Ryan thought of Grace safely with Diane for the moment, but still vulnerable if Harrington decided to target her father's loved ones. We need to go public with what we know, now before he can do any more damage. Victoria shook her head, the movement causing her to wince again. We don't have enough concrete evidence yet, just suspicions and fragments of information. If we move too soon, Harrington will simply deny everything, use his considerable resources to discredit us, and continue with the project once the 60-day review period ends. Then what do we do? Wait for him to come after us again? Victoria's lips curved in a small, determined smile that reminded Ryan of the corporate CEO he'd first encountered in the basement. No, we find proof, conclusive, undeniable proof of the contamination and Harrington's knowledge of it. How he's already taken your environmental reports. Not all of them. Victoria's voice dropped lower, a hint of triumph coloring her words. My father kept backups of everything important. Physical copies stored in a safe deposit box that only I can access, including, I believe, the original environmental assessment of the Lincoln Heights property from when he purchased it from Harrington Chemical. Ryan leaned forward, hope stirring despite his caution. Where is this safe deposit box? First Cedar Bank downtown branch. I was planning to go there this morning before Melanie found me on the floor. Victoria glanced at the IV in her arm with undisguised frustration. The doctors insist on keeping me here for observation until tomorrow, at least. Ryan understood her implication immediately. You want me to go to the bank? Would they even give me access to your father's safe deposit box? Not without me, but we don't have time to wait. Victoria reached for her phone on the bedside table, checking the time. It's nearly noon. The bank closes at 5 a.m. If we don't get those documents today, Harrington might find a way to block our access to them entirely. So what's the plan? Victoria studied him for a long moment, as if making a final assessment before committing to a course of action. I need to get out of here, and I need your help to do it. 3 hours later, Ryan pulled his work truck into the alley behind First Cedar Bank, heart pounding with a mixture of adrenaline and disbelief at what they'd just done. Beside him in the passenger seat, Victoria Ashford, CEO of a billion-dollar corporation, and his former nemesis, sat wrapped in the spare jacket he kept behind the seat, her hospital gown hidden beneath it, an IV bruise visible on her arm where she'd removed the needle herself. Are you sure you're up for this? Ryan asked, eyeing her pale face with concern. You did collapse a few hours ago. Victoria straightened, summoning dignity despite her bizarre attire. I'm fine, it was just exhaustion, nothing more dramatic, and this is too important to delay. Ryan nodded, though he remained unconvinced. In the short time he'd known her, Victoria Ashford had never admitted weakness or limitation. The fact that she'd needed his help to escape the hospital spoke volumes about the seriousness of their situation. All right, what now? You can't exactly walk into the bank looking like that. Victoria actually smiled, a genuine smile that transformed her face, softening the sharp edges and illuminating something warm beneath her usual icy exterior. That's why we're at the back entrance. Marion Chen, the branch manager, is an old family friend. I've already texted her. As if on cue, a service door opened, and a middle-aged Asian woman in an elegant pantsuit stepped out, looking around cautiously before approaching the truck. Victoria rolled down the window. Victoria, what on earth is going on? Your text said it was an emergency. It is, Marion. I need access to my father's safe deposit box without going through the front lobby. Marion's eyes widened as she took in Victoria's appearance, the scrubbed top, the disheveled hair, the pallor of her skin. Are you in some kind of trouble? Should I call the police? No police, Victoria said firmly. It's complicated, but I promise I'll explain everything later. Right now, I just need those documents. Marion hesitated, clearly torn between concern for Victoria and curiosity about the bizarre situation. Her gaze shifted to Ryan, questioning. This is Ryan Mitchell, Victoria said. He's helping me with a sensitive matter related to Ashford Industries. You can trust him. The fact that Victoria would say he could be trusted after their contentious history struck Ryan as perhaps the strangest development yet in this increasingly surreal day. Marion finally nodded. Come in through the service entrance. I'll take you to the vault myself. Inside the bank's back corridors, Ryan felt distinctly out of place among the polished surfaces and quiet efficiency. Victoria, despite her hospital escapee appearance, moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to such environments. Marion led them to a private room adjacent to the main vault. Wait here, she instructed, her professional demeanor firmly back in place. I'll need to verify your identity, Victoria. Standard procedure even for you. After Marion left, Ryan turned to Victoria, who had sunk into one of the room's plush chairs with poorly concealed relief. Are you sure you're okay? You look like you might pass out again. Victoria waved away his concern with a dismissive hand, though the gesture lacked its usual imperious energy. I'm fine, just need a moment to catch my breath. You know, most people would still be in the hospital after collapsing, not breaking out to conduct corporate espionage against their own board member. A hint of her usual sharp humor returned to Victoria's eyes. I'm not most people, Mr. Mitchell. Surely you've noticed that by now. Ryan couldn't help but smile. I've noticed. Well, their eyes met, and for a moment something shifted between them, a recognition of the bizarre circumstances that had transformed them from adversaries to unlikely allies. Victoria looked away, first a faint color rising in her cheeks that had nothing to do with her medical condition. Marion returned with the necessary paperwork, which Victoria signed with a steady hand that belied her weakened state. I've closed the vault to other customers for routine maintenance, Marion explained. You'll have privacy. The safe deposit box was larger than Ryan had expected, more of a small trunk than a box. It took both him and Marion to carry it to the private room where Victoria inserted a key from her wallet and lifted the lid. Inside were dozens of files neatly labeled in an elegant handwriting that must have belonged to Edward Ashford. Victoria immediately began sorting through them with the efficiency of someone accustomed to processing large amounts of information quickly. Here, she said after a few minutes, pulling out a thick file labeled Harrington Property Acquisition 2003. She opened it on the table, spreading out its contents: environmental surveys, purchase agreements, correspondence. Ryan leaned over her shoulder, scanning the documents. His eyes widened as he found what they were looking for: a comprehensive environmental assessment of the property, complete with soil sample results showing significant contamination in multiple areas. Look at this, he said, pointing to a highlighted section. Chromium levels 10 times the legal limit. Lead arsenic industrial solvents. This place was a toxic dump, and Harrington Chemical knew it. Victoria nodded grimly, flipping to another document. And here's my father's plan. He knew the only way to force a proper cleanup was to sell the land for a sensitive use like a school that would trigger mandatory remediation under federal law. She shook her head, a complex mixture of emotions crossing her face. All these years, I thought he'd made a foolish business decision, selling valuable commercial property at a loss. But he was actually trying to correct an environmental crime. A crime that Harrington is now trying to cover up by reacquiring the land, Ryan added, the pieces clicking into place. If Ashford Industries builds the shopping center, they can handle the contamination quietly without public scrutiny or proper remediation. Victoria turned to another file, this one labeled H. Mitchell Correspondence. Ryan's breath caught in his throat, and as she opened it, revealing several handwritten letters in Helen's familiar script. Your wife wrote to my father after he was discharged, Victoria explained softly. They stayed in touch. She was important to him during his recovery. Ryan picked up one of the letters with trembling hands, recognizing immediately the warmth and compassion that had made Helen such an exceptional nurse. She wrote about her hopes for her patients, her belief in their capacity for positive change, her conviction that it was never too late to choose a different path. She never told me, he said, his voice rough with emotion, about your father, about these letters. Patient confidentiality, perhaps, Victoria suggested. Or maybe she didn't want to burden you with it during her illness. Ryan carefully returned the letter to its file, his mind reeling with this new connection between his late wife and the Ashford family. So your father bought the contaminated property because of Helen's influence, because she helped him see things differently. Victoria's expression softened, vulnerability showing through her usual composed facade. I believe so. In his journal, he wrote about wanting to make amends and leave a better legacy. He mentioned your wife, often calling her his conscience in Scrubs. Ryan smiled despite himself, the description perfectly capturing Helen's gentle but persistent moral clarity. That sounds like her. They spent the next hour going through the files, gathering evidence of both the contamination and Harrington's knowledge of it. The documents painted a damning picture. Harrington Chemical had knowingly allowed toxins to leach into the soil for years, then attempted to unload the property quickly when regulations tightened. Edward Ashford had purchased it specifically to prevent Harrington from selling to an unsuspecting commercial developer, instead forcing a proper environmental assessment through the school construction process. This is more than enough to stop the Lincoln Heights project, Ryan said, organizing the most critical documents into a separate pile. With these, we can prove that Harrington has been trying to cover up environmental crimes. Victoria nodded, though her expression remained troubled. It's enough to stop the project, yes, but not enough to truly hold Harrington accountable. These documents are 20 years old. We need current testing to prove the contamination is still present and spreading. The testing you were conducting before Harrington took the reports from your office? Exactly. Without current data, he can claim the problem was addressed during the school construction and no longer exists. Victoria tapped her fingers against the table, thinking, we need to get independent soil samples from the property. Today, if possible, before Harrington realizes what we're doing and finds a way to block access. Ryan checked his watch, nearly 4:00 p.m. The school will be empty soon. But how do we get samples? Don't we need special equipment professionals? Victoria's expression shifted to one of grim determination. Yes, we do. And fortunately, I know exactly who to call. By 6:00 p.m., as dusk settled over Cedar Falls, Ryan found himself standing behind Lincoln Elementary School with Victoria and an environmental engineer named Alex Rodriguez, who had arrived with surprising speed after Victoria's phone call. Alex wore casual clothes rather than anything identifying his profession and carried what looked like ordinary gardening tools, though Ryan suspected they were specialized for soil collection. The most likely contamination would be in this area, Alex explained, consulting a map of the property Victoria had obtained from her files. Based on the original plan location and the groundwater flow patterns, they moved carefully through the wooded area behind the school, Alex taking samples at regular intervals and storing them in sealed containers. Victoria, still pale but moving with determined energy, documented each location with her phone, creating a record that would be difficult to dispute. Ryan kept watch, acutely aware that what they were doing might technically be trespassing, even though the property was a public school. More concerning was the possibility that Harrington might have people monitoring the site, especially after discovering Victoria's interest in the environmental reports. As they worked, Ryan found himself continually glancing at Victoria, still struggling to reconcile this version of her committed, principled, willing to risk her health and possibly her career to expose the truth, with the cold corporate executive who had mocked Helen's watch and threatened his community. You're staring, Mr. Mitchell, Victoria noted, without looking up from where she was photographing Alex's sample collection. Something on your mind? Ryan hesitated, then decided on honesty. I'm trying to understand how the person who stood in my basement and said that progress requires sacrifice is now breaking out of hospitals and conducting clandestine soil sampling to save the very community she was planning to demolish. Victoria's hands stilled, her gaze remaining fixed on the ground. People can change, Mr. Mitchell. Sometimes they just need a reason. And what was your reason? She looked up, then meeting his eyes with an intensity that caught him off guard. You, or rather what you represent. Integrity, courage, the willingness to fight for something bigger than yourself even when it seems hopeless. She glanced away as if embarrassed by her own admission. It's not a quality I encounter often in my usual circles. Before Ryan could respond to this unexpected revelation, Alex straightened from his work, holding up a sample container. This doesn't look good. The soil here has obvious discoloration and an odor consistent with petroleum-based contamination. I'll need to run proper tests, but based on my experience, I'd say we're looking at significant toxic presence. And we're less than 200 yards from the school playground. Victoria's expression hardened. How quickly can you complete the analysis? For preliminary results, 24 hours if I put a rush on it. Comprehensive findings would take longer. Do the rush analysis, Victoria instructed. I'll triple your usual rate. We need those results immediately. As Alex packed up his equipment, Ryan noticed Victoria swaying slightly, her face even paler than before. Without thinking, he moved closer, placing a steadying hand on her arm. You need to rest. You shouldn't even be out of the hospital. She started to object, then seemed to reconsider as another wave of dizziness visibly passed through her. Perhaps you're right, but I can't go back to the hospital. Harrington would find me there, and I can't go to my apartment either. It's the first place he'd look. Ryan made a quick decision. You'll come to my place. It's the last location anyone would expect you to be. Victoria raised an eyebrow, a hint of her usual sardonic humor returning. Are you inviting me for a sleepover, Mr. Mitchell? I'm offering you a safe place to rest while we figure out our next move. Ryan corrected, though he couldn't help but return her small smile. And given that we're conducting secret environmental testing together, maybe you could start calling me Ryan." Her smile widened slightly. "Ryan, then. And yes, I accept your offer of sanctuary, though I should warn you that I'm an exceedingly demanding house guest." Somehow that doesn't surprise me. They waited while Alex departed with the samples, promising to call as soon as he had preliminary results. Then Ryan helped Victoria to his truck, noticing how she leaned on him more heavily than before, her body finally acknowledging the stress and exhaustion it had been fighting all day. As they drove through the darkening streets of Cedar Falls, Ryan called Diane to check on Grace, relieved to hear that his daughter was happily playing with Sarah and showing no signs of concern about her unusual sleepover arrangement. He kept his explanation deliberately vague, promising again to fill Diane in on the details soon. "Your daughter is with friends tonight?" Victoria asked after he ended the call. "Yes, I thought it was safer given what's happening." Victoria nodded, her expression solemn. "You're a good father, Ryan. Grace is fortunate." The simple compliment delivered without her usual sharp edge touched Ryan unexpectedly. "I try to be. It's not always easy, especially since Helen died. But you keep trying, that's what matters." Victoria turned to look out the window, her voice softening. "My father wasn't always present when I was growing up. Business took priority. It wasn't until his heart attack, until he met your wife, that he seemed to understand what he'd missed." The revelation of this vulnerability, this glimpse into Victoria's personal history, created a sudden intimacy in the truck's small cabin. Ryan found himself wanting to know more about the woman behind the corporate mask, about the path that had led her to become the person he'd first met in the basement, and then the very different woman sitting beside him now. His apartment building looked shabbier than usual as they pulled up, the peeling paint and sagging gutters stark in the harsh glow of the security lights. Ryan felt a flash of self-consciousness as he helped Victoria from the truck, acutely aware of the contrast between his modest home and the luxury she was accustomed to. "It's not much," he said as they climbed the stairs to his second-floor unit, "but it's clean and safe." Victoria didn't respond immediately, her attention seemingly focused on managing the stairs without revealing how weak she still felt. When they reached his door, however, she paused, looking at him directly. "Thank you," she said simply, "for helping me today, for trusting me despite every reason not to." The sincerity in her voice, the absence of her usual armor, made Ryan acutely aware of how close they were standing, of the faint scent of her perfume, still detectable beneath the antiseptic hospital smell, of the way the hallway light caught the gold in her hair. For a moment he forgot about Lincoln Heights, about Harrington, about all the complications that had brought them to this point. There was just this woman, this unexpected connection. The moment stretched charged with possibility until Mrs. Abernathy's door opened across the hall, breaking the spell. "Mitchell, I thought I heard you out here." The elderly woman peered at them curiously, her gaze lingering on Victoria with undisguised interest. "Grace isn't with you. She didn't come home from school. She's staying with her friend Sarah tonight," Ryan explained quickly. "This is a colleague, Victoria. We're working on a project together." Mrs. Abernathy's eyebrows rose, her expression making it clear she had her own ideas about what kind of project might require a woman to visit Ryan's apartment in the evening. "Well, isn't that nice? You two have a good night then." She retreated back into her apartment with a knowing smile that made Ryan want to sink through the floor. Victoria's lips twitched with barely suppressed amusement as Ryan unlocked his door. "A colleague, is that what I am now? It seems simpler than explaining that you're the CEO trying to demolish our neighborhood, who's now helping me expose an environmental cover-up after escaping from the hospital." Victoria laughed, a genuine, unguarded sound that transformed her face, revealing the woman who might have existed if life had taken different turns. "Yes, I suppose that would have required more explanation than your neighbor was prepared for." Inside the apartment, Ryan was grateful that he'd tidied up that morning, though the modest furnishings and worn carpet couldn't be disguised. Victoria didn't comment on her surroundings, however, moving instead to the kitchen table where Grace's homework still lay spread out alongside Ryan's notes about the Lincoln Heights project. "Your daughter is artistic," Victoria observed, gently touching a drawing Grace had made of their apartment building, with all the neighbors standing outside holding hands in a circle. "She sees connections between people." "Like her mother," Ryan said, the comparison coming naturally. "Helen could always see the best in people, the potential for connection, even in unlikely places." Victoria nodded, her fingers tracing the childish figures in the drawing. That explains a lot about you, too. Before Ryan could ask what she meant, Victoria swayed again, catching herself against the table's edge. Her face had gone alarmingly pale, the earlier exertion clearly taking its toll. You need to rest, Ryan said firmly, moving to her side. You can take my bedroom. I'll sleep on the couch. Victoria started to protest, then seemed to recognize the futility of it as another wave of dizziness hit her. Just for a few hours, she conceded. We still have work to do once Alex calls with the preliminary results. Ryan led her to his bedroom, acutely aware of the strangeness of having Victoria Ashford in his personal space. The room was simple, a queen bed with a plain blue comforter, a dresser with framed photos of Grace and Helen, a small bookshelf filled with electrical manuals, and a few novels Helen had loved. Victoria paused at the photograph, studying one of Helen holding a newborn Grace, her expression soft with wonder. She was beautiful, Victoria said quietly. I can see why my father was so taken with her spirit. She was the best person I have ever known, Ryan replied, the words coming easily despite the familiar ache of loss. Kind without being weak, strong without being hard. Victoria turned to him, something vulnerable and questioning in her eyes. The opposite of me, then. Ryan shook his head. I used to think so. Now I'm not so sure. Their eyes held for a long moment, the air between them charged with unspoken possibilities, with connections neither had anticipated. Then Victoria looked away, a hint of her old self-protective reserve returning. I should rest, she said, her voice carefully neutral. And you should check on your daughter, make sure she's okay with her friend. Well, Ryan nodded, accepting the withdrawal while recognizing it for what it was, not rejection, but caution. A pause rather than an ending. There are clean towels in the bathroom if you want to shower, and I can find you something to wear besides that scrub top. He left her to settle in, returning to the kitchen to call Diane again and check on Grace. His daughter was fine already in pajamas and excited about watching a movie with Sarah before bed. After ensuring that Diane still had no concerns about the unexpected sleepover arrangement, Ryan hung up and leaned against the counter, trying to process the day's extraordinary events. Just a week ago, Victoria Ashford had been his adversary, a corporate predator, threatening his daughter's school and his community. Now she was sleeping in his bed, having risked her health and possibly her career to expose an environmental cover-up that her own company was involved in. The transformation seemed impossible, yet here they were. Ryan made himself a sandwich, realizing he hadn't eaten since morning, and prepared a second one for Victoria in case she was hungry when she woke. He was setting them on plates when his phone rang, an unknown number. Hello. Ryan, it's Emma Chen from the Gazette. The reporter's voice was tense, urgent. I need to talk to you immediately about Victoria Ashford in the Lincoln Heights project. Ryan hesitated, wary of sharing information that might jeopardize their investigation into the contamination. I'm not sure I have anything new to tell you, Emma. But I have something to tell you, she insisted. Something you need to know before you get in any deeper with Victoria Ashford. The ominous tone set off warning bells in Ryan's mind. What are you talking about? Not over the phone. Can you meet me tonight? It's important. Ryan glanced toward the bedroom where Victoria was resting. I can't leave right now. Can you tell me what this is about? Emma sighed, clearly frustrated. It's about Victoria Ashford's real reasons for getting close to you. She's not who you think she is, Ryan. She's playing you. A cold feeling settled in Ryan's stomach. What do you mean? Victoria Ashford has known about the contamination at Lincoln Heights from the beginning. She's not trying to expose it. She's trying to control the narrative, to limit Ashford Industries' liability by managing how and when the information comes out. Ryan's mind raced, trying to reconcile this accusation with the Victoria he'd spent the day with, the woman who'd broken out of the hospital, who'd risked her health to gather evidence, who'd looked at Helen's photo with genuine respect. How do you know this? He asked, keeping his voice low to ensure Victoria couldn't overhear from the bedroom. I have a source inside Ashford Industries, someone who's seen the internal communications between Victoria and the board. She's been playing both sides, Ryan, using you to gain credibility with the community while simultaneously working with Harrington to minimize the company's exposure. The accusation hit Ryan like a physical blow. Could it be true? Had he been manipulated all along? The Victoria he'd encountered today seemed genuine in her desire to expose the truth, but he'd also witnessed her remarkable ability to adapt and persuade. What if this was just another performance, another corporate strategy, I need to see proof, he said finally. Documents, emails, something concrete. I have them, Emma assured him, but I can't send them electronically, too risky. Meet me at Riverside Park in an hour, same spot as before. I'll bring everything. After Emma hung up, Ryan stood motionless in the kitchen, his mind swirling with doubt and confusion. The timing of the call seemed suspicious, coming just as he and Victoria were making progress with the environmental testing. But Emma had been the one to first alert him to the possibility of contamination. Why would she try to undermine their investigation now? Unless Victoria had somehow gotten to her, or unless Harrington had. The shower was running. Victoria was apparently taking him up on the offer to clean up. He had at least 15 minutes before she'd emerge, possibly longer if she decided to rest afterward. Time enough to meet Emma and see the supposed evidence for himself. Decision made, Ryan quickly wrote a note explaining that he'd gone to pick up dinner and would be back soon. He left it on the kitchen table where Victoria would see it, then grabbed his keys and headed for the door, pausing only to collect a small recorder from his toolbox, a device he sometimes used to document electrical issues for clients. If Emma really did have damning evidence against Victoria, he wanted to capture the conversation. The October night had turned cold, a sharp wind cutting through Ryan's jacket as he drove to Riverside Park. The conversation with Emma played on repeat in his mind, raising questions that had no easy answers. Had Victoria been manipulating him all along? Was her apparent transformation from corporate shark to environmental crusader just an elaborate act? Or was Emma's source feeding her false information, perhaps at Harrington's direction? The park was nearly deserted when Ryan arrived, just a few cars in the lot belonging to the last joggers of the evening. He made his way to the boat launch area, the same spot where he'd met Emma before. The wooden dock extended into the dark water, illuminated only by a single lamppost that cast long shadows across the planks. Emma was already there, a manila envelope clutched in her hands. She turned as Ryan approached, relief evident in her expression. "You came. I wasn't sure you would. You said you had proof that Victoria Ashford is playing me. I need to see it." Emma nodded, opening the envelope. "These are internal Ashford Industries memos from the past week. They show that Victoria has been fully aware of the contamination issue from the beginning of the Lincoln Heights project, not just since finding her father's files." She handed Ryan several printed pages, which he struggled to read in the dim light. They appeared to be emails between Victoria and Thomas Harrington discussing containment strategies for the legacy issue at the Lincoln site. In one particularly damning exchange, Victoria supposedly wrote, "Mitchell is proving useful as a community liaison. His connection to my father's nurse gives us a perfect cover story for my sudden interest in environmental concerns." Ryan felt sick as he read the words, the betrayal cutting deeper than he would have expected. "How did you get these?" "My source is someone high up in Ashford Industries. Someone who believes the public deserves to know the truth." Emma took the papers back, returning them to the envelope. "Victoria Ashford isn't your ally, Ryan. She's using you to manage a potential PR disaster for her company." Ryan shook his head, still struggling to reconcile these documents with the Victoria who had stared at Helen's photo with genuine emotion, who had collapsed from exhaustion while trying to gather evidence, who had shared her father's letters and revealed her own vulnerabilities. "Why tell me this now? Why not when we first met?" Emma hesitated, something flickering across her face that Ryan couldn't quite identify. "I didn't have confirmation until today. My source took a significant risk getting these documents to me." Something about her explanation felt off, though Ryan couldn't pinpoint exactly what. Perhaps it was the convenient timing or the way Emma kept referencing her anonymous source without offering any details that could verify their existence. "I need to take those documents," Ryan said, reaching for the envelope, "to study them more carefully." Emma pulled back, clutching the envelope tighter. "I can't let them out of my possession. My source was explicit about that, but I can give you copies tomorrow." Ryan's suspicions deepened. A legitimate journalist would want their evidence examined, verified. Emma's reluctance suggested something else might be happening here. "At least let me take a photo of them with my phone," he suggested, already reaching for his pocket, "so I can study them more carefully." "No." Emma's response was too quick, too vehement. "No photos. My source was clear that digital copies could be traced." Ryan took a step back, his instincts now screaming that something was very wrong with this situation. "You know, it's funny. You keep talking about this source, but you've never once mentioned their name or position. And these emails you're showing me, they're awfully convenient. almost like they were created specifically to drive a wedge between me and Victoria. Emma's expression hardened. You don't believe me. You think I'm making this up. I think someone might be using you, Emma. Or, Ryan paused, a new possibility occurring to him. Or you might not be Emma Chen at all. The woman's posture changed, subtle but unmistakable, a shift from earnest journalist to something more calculating, more dangerous. You're smarter than Harrington gave you credit for, she said, her voice dropping its previous urgency, but not smart enough to stay away from Victoria Ashford. Ryan's blood ran cold as the truth clicked into place. You're working for Harrington. The woman who had called herself Emma Chen smiled, all pretense of journalistic integrity gone. Thomas Harrington protects his interests, Mr. Mitchell. The real Emma Chen is currently out of town at a journalism conference in Chicago, something you could have verified with a simple phone call to the Gazette. But you were too eager to believe that Victoria Ashford might be deceiving you. Ryan backed away, acutely aware that they were alone in a dark, isolated area of the park. So the documents are fake. Victoria really is trying to expose the contamination. The contamination is real enough, not Emma confirmed, but so is Victoria's vulnerability. Harrington has been gathering evidence of her father's involvement in a number of questionable business practices over the years. If she pushes too hard on Lincoln Heights, that information goes public and destroys Edward Ashford's legacy. She knows this, which is why she's been so careful, so strategic in her approach. You're trying to turn me against her, Ryan realized. To isolate her. Why, the woman shrugged, dropping all pretense now. Divide and conquer. Basic strategy. Victoria Ashford alone is manageable. She has too much to lose by taking Harrington on directly. But Victoria Ashford, with community support, with your particular brand of moral crusading behind her, that's more problematic. Ryan had heard enough. He turned to leave, his only thought now to get back to his apartment to warn Victoria about Harrington's schemes. I wouldn't rush home if I were you, and the woman called after him, her voice carrying a threat that stopped Ryan in his tracks. Who knows what might have happened while you've been gone? Harrington's people are quite efficient. Ryan burst through his apartment door, heart hammering against his ribs. The living room was empty, the note he'd left still sitting on the kitchen table. But Victoria was gone. Victoria, he called, moving quickly to the bedroom. The bathroom door stood open, steam still lingering from the shower, but she was nowhere to be found. On the bed lay his note about getting dinner now, with an addition in elegant handwriting. Ryan Harrington called. He has Grace. Meeting him at Ashford Industries. Don't follow. We'll handle this. V. The world seemed to tilt beneath Ryan's feet, a roaring in his ears, drowning out all other sounds. Grace. Harrington had Grace. But how she was supposed to be safe with Diane. With shaking hands, Ryan called Diane's number. No answer. He tried again with the same result, panic building with each unanswered ring. Finally desperate, he called Sarah's cell phone, a number Grace had memorized for emergencies, which Ryan had therefore also memorized. The young girl answered on the second ring, her voice small and confused. Hello. Sarah, it's Mr. Mitchell, Grace's dad. Is Grace there with you? Can I talk to her? Grace went home, Sarah said, sounding puzzled. Her mom came to get her about an hour ago. She said there was a family emergency. Ryan's blood turned to ice. Her mom, the lady said she was Grace's mom's sister. She had a picture of Grace's mom and everything. She said you sent her to bring Grace home. Ryan fought to keep his voice calm, not wanting to frighten the child. Is your mom there, Sarah? Can I talk to her? She's giving Tim his bath. Do you want me to get her? Yes, please, right away. While he waited, Ryan's mind raced. Someone claiming to be Helen's sister, a sister who didn't exist, had taken Grace from Diane's house, which meant Harrington had been planning this move before Ryan ever left the apartment to meet Emma. The whole thing had been a setup to get him away from Victoria and to isolate Grace. Diane came on the line, her voice immediately anxious. Ryan, what's wrong? Sarah said you're asking about Grace. Did someone come and take Grace from your house? Ryan demanded, too frantic for niceties. Yes, about an hour ago, a woman who said she was Helen's sister. She had ID and everything, Ryan. She said you'd had a family emergency and sent her to bring Grace home. Grace seemed to recognize her from a photo she showed. Helen doesn't have a sister. Ryan cut in, his voice tight with fear. That woman wasn't family. Did she say where she was taking Grace? Diane's sharp intake of breath told him she understood the gravity of the situation. Oh my God, Ryan, I'm so sorry. I never would have let her go if I'd had any doubt. She seemed so legitimate, and Grace wasn't afraid. It's not your fault, Ryan assured her, already moving toward the door. Call the police. Tell them Grace Mitchell has been taken by someone falsely claiming to be family. I'm going to find her. He ended the call and dialed Victoria's number, praying she would answer despite her note instructing him not to follow. The call went straight to voicemail, increasing his fear that she might be walking into the same trap that had ensnared Grace. Ryan grabbed his keys, his mind clearing as adrenaline and parental instinct overrode panic. Harrington had taken Grace to lure Victoria to Ashford Industries. Victoria had gone believing she could handle the situation. But neither of them understood what Ryan now knew, that Harrington was willing to go to extraordinary lengths, including kidnapping a child to protect his family's dark secrets. As he ran for his truck, Ryan's hand brushed against Helen's watch on his wrist. The familiar weight of it, the connection to her steady moral compass, helped center him. Helen would know what to do. Helen would be brave and smart and focused on saving their daughter. Ryan could do no less. The Ashford Industries building loomed against the night sky, most of its windows dark except for the top floor, where lights still blazed from what Ryan assumed must be the executive offices. He parked his truck directly in front of the main entrance, not caring about the no parking signs or the possibility of being towed. Nothing mattered now except getting to Grace. The lobby doors were locked, but the security desk was still staffed by a single guard who looked up in surprise as Ryan pounded on the glass. After a moment's hesitation, the guard approached the door, opening it just enough to speak. "Building's closed to the public, sir. You'll need to come back tomorrow." "I need to get to the executive floor," Ryan said, fighting to keep his voice steady. "It's an emergency. My daughter is up there." The guard's expression shifted from professional detachment to confusion. "Your daughter in the executive offices at this hour. Thomas Harrington has her," Ryan explained, aware of how improbable it sounded. "And Victoria Ashford. Please, I just need to get upstairs." "Sir, Mr. Harrington left hours ago, and Ms. Ashford hasn't been in the office today. She's out sick. There's no one on the executive floor except the cleaning staff." Ryan's mind raced. If Harrington wasn't here, where had he taken Grace and Victoria? "The lights are on up there," he pointed out, gesturing toward the illuminated top floor. "That's the automated system," the guard explained. "Certain offices stay lit for security purposes, but I can assure you no one's up there. I'd see them on the security monitors." Ryan felt a cold certainty that the guard was lying or had been instructed to lie if Ryan appeared. "Then you won't mind if I check for myself." Before the guard could respond, Ryan pushed past him into the lobby, heading for the elevators. The guard called after him, threatening to call the police, but Ryan ignored him. Let them call. He needed to find Grace. The executive elevator required a key card, but the service elevator at the back of the lobby did not. Ryan ducked into it just as the guard reached for his radio, presumably to call for backup. As the doors closed, Ryan punched the button for the top floor, his heart pounding in his chest. The elevator rose smoothly, each floor bringing him closer to whatever confrontation awaited. Ryan had no plan beyond finding Grace and ensuring her safety. Victoria, with her resources and connections, would have to fend for herself. When the elevator doors opened on the executive floor, Ryan found himself in a dimly lit service corridor, the air heavy with the smell of cleaning products. He moved cautiously toward where he assumed the main offices would be, guided by the glow of light coming from beneath a door at the end of the hall. As he drew closer, he could hear voices. Harrington's smooth, cultured tones and Victoria's sharper, more urgent responses. But no child's voice. No sign of Grace. Ryan pressed himself against the wall beside the door, straining to hear the conversation within. "You've made quite a mess of things, Victoria," Harrington was saying, his voice casual as if discussing a minor scheduling issue rather than kidnapping. "Your father would be disappointed. He understood how the game is played." "My father understood responsibility," Victoria replied, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Something you've spent your entire career avoiding. Now where is the girl you said she would be here?" "All in good time. First, I need your assurance that this environmental crusade of yours is finished. The Lincoln Heights project proceeds as originally planned. The contamination is handled quietly during construction. No public statements, no independent testing, No dramatic revelations. And if I refuse, Harrington's laugh held no humor, then Mr. Mitchell's daughter becomes a tragic statistic, a child who wandered too close to a construction site, perhaps, or a victim of a random abduction. Cedar Falls has its share of unsavory elements, after all. The casual cruelty, the willingness to threaten a child's life to protect corporate interests, made Ryan's blood boil, but he forced himself to remain still to listen. Rushing in without understanding the full situation would only endanger Grace further. "You're bluffing," Victoria said, though her voice held a note of uncertainty. "You wouldn't harm a child. Even you have limits, Thomas." "Do I?" "The contamination at Lincoln Heights has already harmed dozens of children over the years. Elevated cancer rates, developmental issues, all traceable to the toxins my family's company left in the soil. What's one more casualty in the grand scheme of things?" Ryan heard Victoria's sharp intake of breath. "You knew. All this time you knew children were being affected." "Of course I knew, just as your father knew when he forced the sale to the school district. His grand moral gesture using innocent children as canaries in the coal mine to force a cleanup that should have been my financial responsibility. Very clever of Edward. Very cruel too, though I doubt he saw it that way." Ryan had heard enough. If Harrington was willing to acknowledge harming children through contamination, he was certainly capable of harming Grace directly. And if Grace wasn't in that room with Victoria and Harrington, where was she? He scanned the corridor, noticing a door marked Executive Lounge a few yards away. Moving silently, Ryan approached it, turning the handle slowly. It was unlocked. Inside the lounge was dark except for the city lights filtering through large windows. As Ryan's eyes adjusted, he could make out plush furniture, a bar area, and a small kitchenette. And there, curled up on a sofa, her small form barely visible in the dim light, was Grace. Ryan rushed to her side, his heart in his throat. She appeared to be sleeping, her breathing deep and regular. When he touched her shoulder gently, she stirred, but didn't fully wake. "Grace," he whispered, checking her for any signs of injury. "Gracie, wake up. It's Daddy." Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. "Daddy, I'm so tired." "I know, sweetheart, but we need to go now." Ryan gathered her into his arms, relief washing through him as she nestled against his chest. She seemed unhurt, just unnaturally drowsy. Had they given her something to make her sleep? As he turned to leave the lounge, door open, light from the corridor spilling in. Harrington stood there, his aristocratic features set in an expression of mild annoyance, as if dealing with an unexpected delivery rather than a father rescuing his kidnapped daughter. "Mr. Mitchell, how predictable. Victoria assured me you wouldn't follow her, but I knew better." Harrington stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. The masculine hero complex is so tediously reliable. Ryan tightened his hold on Grace, backing toward the windows. "Stay away from us." "Or what?" Harrington seemed genuinely curious. "You'll call the police report that your daughter was kidnapped by a respected business leader. With no evidence beyond your word against mine, I don't think so." "Where's Victoria?" "Considering my offer. She's quite pragmatic when properly motivated. Unlike you with your tiresome moral absolutism." Ryan continued moving backward, trying to put distance between Grace and this man who spoke of harming children with such casual indifference. "The contamination is real. You've been poisoning people for decades. Children, families. And now you're trying to cover it up by building a shopping mall." Harrington shrugged, the gesture elegant and dismissive. "Business is about managing liabilities, Mr. Mitchell. The contamination is a liability. The Lincoln Heights project transforms it into an asset. It's really quite elegant from a financial perspective." "It's criminal," Ryan countered, his back now against the cool glass of the windows. "And people will find out. Victoria has her father's files. We have soil samples being tested right now. You can't silence everyone." Something shifted in Harrington's expression, a flicker of genuine concern breaking through his composed facade. "Soil samples when where?" The reaction confirmed what Ryan had suspected. Harrington didn't know about their clandestine testing that afternoon. He'd been focused on separating Ryan from Victoria, on isolating Grace's leverage, but he hadn't anticipated how much progress they had already made in gathering evidence. Before Harrington could recover from this revelation, the lounge door burst open again. Victoria stood there, her face pale but determined, a security guard's key card in her hand. "It's over, Thomas." she said, her voice steady despite the exhaustion evident in her posture. I've just emailed the board of directors, the EPA, and the Cedar Falls Gazette copies of all the documentation. My father's original environmental assessment, the recent soil tests, your emails about covering up the contamination, everything. Harrington's composure cracked entirely, his face contorting with rage. You stupid girl, do you have any idea what you've done, the liability you've created, the shareholder value you've destroyed? I've done what my father should have done 8 years ago, Victoria replied, moving into the room to stand beside Ryan and Grace. Expose the truth, chosen people over profits, the right path instead of the easy one. Harrington lunged forward suddenly, his control abandoning him completely. You've ruined everything, your father's company, your inheritance, my reputation, all destroyed because you couldn't stay in your lane. Victoria didn't flinch, meeting his fury with a calm certainty that Ryan couldn't help but admire. No, Thomas, you destroyed those things yourself the moment you decided that money mattered more than people's lives, more than children's health and safety. As if on cue, the sound of sirens became audible outside the building, blue and red lights reflecting off the glass behind them. Harrington froze, his face draining of color as he realized the extent of his defeat. That would be the police, Victoria explained, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. I called them before coming up here, told them everything, the kidnapping, the contamination, your threats. They were quite interested, particularly in the part about endangering children. Harrington seemed to age before their eyes, his shoulders slumping as the full weight of his actions and their consequences settled upon him. Without another word, he sank into one of the lounge chairs, all fight gone out of him. Ryan held Grace closer, her drowsy weight in his arms, the only reality that mattered in that moment. He looked at Victoria, standing tall despite her hospital escape just hours earlier, her face illuminated by the pulsing police lights from below. Thank you, he said simply, knowing the words were inadequate for what she had done, for the risks she had taken, the transformation she had undergone. Victoria's expression softened as she looked at Grace, her hand reaching out to gently brush a strand of hair from the child's face. Some things are worth fighting for, she said quietly, even when it costs you everything. In that moment, with Grace safe in his arms and Victoria standing beside them, Ryan felt something shift between them. The final barriers falling away, replaced by a connection forged in crisis and cemented in shared purpose. Whatever came next, the police statements, the environmental investigations, the inevitable corporate and legal battles, they would face it together. The sound of heavy footsteps in the corridor announced the arrival of the police. As Victoria moved to open the door for them, she paused, turning back to Ryan with a small, genuine smile. By the way, she said, her voice lighter than he'd ever heard it before, I think it's time you started calling me Vicky. Days passed in a blur of police statements, medical examinations, and media coverage. Grace was found to have been given a mild sedative, enough to make her drowsy, but not enough to cause harm. The doctors assured Ryan she would suffer no lasting effects. Harrington was arrested on multiple charges: kidnapping, environmental violations, corporate fraud. He was released on bail, but barred from approaching any Ashford Industries properties or contacting Victoria, Ryan, or Grace. The company's stock plummeted as the contamination story broke, triggering shareholder lawsuits and regulatory investigations. Through it all, Victoria remained a constant presence in Ryan and Grace's lives. Despite the corporate chaos swirling around her, she made time each day to check on Grace, to bring her small gifts, art supplies, books, once even a small telescope that had the child wide-eyed with wonder. A week after the confrontation at Ashford Industries, Ryan found himself sitting on a bench in Cedar Falls Park, watching as Victoria pushed Grace on the swings. His daughter's laughter carried across the playground, bright and carefree, as if the trauma of her kidnapping had already faded from her young mind. Higher, Vicky, higher, Grace called, and Victoria obliged, pushing the swing with a greater force, her own laughter joining Grace's. The sight stirred something in Ryan's chest, a warmth he hadn't felt in years, a sense of possibility he'd thought died with Helen. It was too soon to name it, too fragile to examine closely, but it was there nonetheless. His phone buzzed with a text from Alex Rodriguez, the environmental engineer. Final test results confirm. Contamination present at dangerous levels. Full report coming tomorrow. This is Big Ryan. He showed the message to Victoria when she and Grace returned to the bench, pink-cheeked and breathless from their play. That's the final nail in Harrington's coffin, Victoria said, her expression solemn despite her casual words. And probably in Ashford Industries as well. The company won't survive this, not in its current form. I'm sorry, Ryan said, realizing that despite everything, this was still the company her father had built, still her inheritance and legacy. Victoria shook her head, a surprising peace in her eyes. Don't be. Some things need to end, so better things can begin. My father would understand that now, I think. Grace tugged at Victoria's sleeve, oblivious to the gravity of their conversation. Can we get ice cream, please? Victoria smiled, the transformation from a corporate CEO to something warmer, more human, now complete in Ryan's eyes. Ice cream sounds perfect. What do you think, Ryan? I think, Ryan began. Then paused, struck by how natural this felt, the three of them together making simple plans, sharing a beautiful autumn day. I think ice cream is exactly what we need. As they walked toward the park's small concession stand, Grace skipping ahead, Victoria's hand brushed against Ryan's, a brief electric contact that might have been accidental but felt deliberate. He looked at her, and the question in his eyes was answered by the gentle certainty in hers. Later, after they'd returned to Ryan's apartment, and Grace had gone to bed exhausted from her day at the park, Ryan and Victoria sat at the kitchen table, a pot of tea between them. The domesticity of the scene struck Ryan as surreal, given where they'd started adversaries on opposite sides of a community battle. The board is meeting tomorrow, Victoria said, wrapping her hands around her mug. They'll almost certainly ask for my resignation. Will you fight it? She shook her head. No, it's time for a change. For the company and for me. What will you do? Ryan asked, trying to imagine Victoria Ashford without the corporate identity that had defined her for so long. I've been thinking about that, she replied, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. My father left me more than just the company. There's a substantial personal fortune separate from Ashford Industries. I've never touched it, never needed to. But now, in fact, now. Now I'm thinking about creating a foundation. The Edward Ashford Environmental Justice Foundation. To help communities like Lincoln Heights fight corporate polluters, to fund cleanup efforts, to support the medical needs of people affected by contamination. Ryan stared at her, amazed by the transformation that had occurred in such a short time. That's incredible, Victoria. Vicky, she corrected gently. I told you it's time for a change. Victoria Ashford was my corporate persona. I think I'd like to be Vicky now, at least with people who matter. The implication hung in the air between them, a question neither was quite ready to voice aloud. Ryan reached across the table, taking her hand in his. The contact was simple, but it carried the weight of everything they'd experienced together, everything they might yet become to each other. I like Vicky, he said softly. She smiled, turning her hand to intertwine her fingers with his. There's something else I've been thinking about. The Lincoln Elementary property. It can't remain a school, not with the contamination levels we found. But I've been consulting with environmental engineers about remediation options. It would be expensive, but with the right approach, the land could be made safe. And then what? And then, Vicky's eyes lit up with the kind of passion Ryan had previously only seen when she talked about corporate acquisitions. We build a new school, a better one, with state-of-the-art facilities, environmental monitoring systems, scholarship programs for families affected by the contamination. We make it a model for how corporations can make amends for past wrongs. We, Ryan repeated, catching the pronoun. Vicky hesitated, vulnerability flashing across her face. I was hoping you might want to be involved. With your connection to the community, your understanding of what the families need, we could make something truly special together. The offer hung in the air, layered with meanings beyond the professional collaboration she was proposing. Ryan thought about Helen, about what she would think of this unexpected turn his life had taken. He could almost hear her voice. Love doesn't follow predictable paths, Ryan. Sometimes it finds you in the most unlikely places. I'd like that, he said finally, to build something together. The next morning, Ryan awoke to the sound of his phone ringing. It was Diane, her voice tight with urgency. Ryan, turn on your TV. Channel 4. Now. He fumbled for the remote, clicking on the small television in the living room. Grace was still asleep in her bedroom, and Vicky had returned to her apartment late the night before, both of them acknowledging the need for space to process the seismic shifts in their relationship. The screen flickered to life, showing a breaking news banner. Ashford Industries executive found dead. Ryan's blood ran cold as the camera cut to a reporter standing outside Thomas Harrington's mansion police vehicles and an ambulance visible in the background. Thomas Harrington, former COO of Ashford Industries and heir to the Harrington chemical fortune, was found dead in his home early this morning, the reporter was saying. Police have not confirmed the cause of death, but sources close to the investigation suggest it may have been suicide. Harrington was recently arrested on charges related to environmental violations and the kidnapping of a local child. In a shocking development, documents left at the scene allegedly detailed decades of corporate cover-ups related to toxic contamination at multiple Harrington chemical sites across the country, including the Lincoln Heights property in Cedar Falls. Ryan grabbed his phone, dialing Vicky's number with shaking hands. She answered on the first ring, her voice calm but strained. "You've seen the news?" "Yes." "Vicky, what does this mean? For the case, for the contamination evidence?" "It means Harrington chose his own way out," she replied, a complex mixture of emotions in her voice. "And it means the truth is finally coming out. The documents he left, they're comprehensive, Ryan. Detailed records of every contaminated Harrington chemical site, internal memos, acknowledging the health risk strategies for avoiding liability. He implicated himself completely while leaving the rest of the board untouched. A final act of corporate loyalty," Ryan observed, understanding the twisted logic. Harrington had protected his business associates even in death. Yes, but it also means we have everything we need now. Irrefutable evidence that will force a full cleanup of Lincoln Heights and every other affected site. Compensation for affected families. Real justice. The doorbell rang, startling Ryan. He moved to the window, peering through the blinds to see a news van parked outside his building, a reporter and cameraman standing at his door. "The press is here," he told Vicky, "at my apartment." "They're at my place too," she replied. "And they'll be at the school. This is going to be a media firestorm, Ryan. Are you ready for that? Is Grace?" The question made him pause. Grace had already been through so much, losing her mother, nearly losing her school, being kidnapped. Could he subject her to the invasion of privacy that would come with being at the center of a national news story? "I don't know," he admitted. "I want justice for the families affected by the contamination. I want Harrington Chemical to pay for what they've done. But Grace?" "I understand," Vicky said softly. "And I have an idea. Meet me at Cedar Falls Airport in 2 hours. Pack for a week, somewhere warm." "What, Vicky? We can't just leave in the middle of all this." "Yes, we can. The evidence is public now. The legal process will move forward with or without our daily presence. The media circus, however, requires fresh meat. If we're not available, they'll move on to the next angle." "But your company, the foundation you were talking about starting, all of that can wait a week," Vicky insisted. "Right now, what matters is giving Grace some space to heal away from cameras and questions, and giving us some time to figure out whatever this is between us without the pressure of being in the public eye." Ryan looked toward Grace's bedroom, where his daughter still slept peacefully, unaware of the chaos unfolding in the adult world around her. Vicky was right. Grace needed stability, normality, time to process everything that had happened. And perhaps he and Vicky needed that too. Space to explore their feelings away from the shadow of corporate scandal and environmental crisis. "Where would we go?" he asked, already knowing he would say yes. "I have a small house on Sanibel Island, very private, beach access, good ice cream nearby." He could hear the smile in her voice. "Grace would love it." "Your idea of a small house and mine might be very different," Ryan said, remembering her casually mentioned substantial personal fortune. Vicky laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "Probably, but it has a swing set and a telescope for stargazing, and no reporters." 2 hours later, Ryan and a sleepy but excited Grace waited at a private terminal of Cedar Falls Airport. He'd explained to his daughter that they were taking a surprise vacation with Vicky away from the cold October weather and towards sunshine and beaches. Grace had accepted this with the adaptability of childhood, her only question being whether she could bring her favorite stuffed animal. When Vicky arrived, she was dressed differently than Ryan had ever seen her. Jeans, a simple blouse, her hair loose around her shoulders. No corporate armor, no facade of untouchability, just a woman nervous and hopeful, embarking on something new. "Are you both ready?" she asked, her eyes meeting Ryan's with a question that went beyond their immediate travel plans. Ryan thought about everything that had happened since that first encounter in the basement of Ashford Industries. The journey from adversaries to allies to whatever they were becoming now. It had been unexpected, complicated, sometimes dangerous. But standing here with Grace's small hand in his and Vicky's tentative smile before him, he knew with absolute certainty that it had been worth it. "We're ready," he said, answering all her questions at once. As they boarded the small private plane, Ryan felt Helen's watch on his wrist. The familiar weight of it, a reminder of the love that had shaped him, that had made him the man he was today. For the first time since her death, the memory brought more comfort than pain, more gratitude than grief. "Daddy, look!" Grace called, pointing out the window as the plane began to taxi. "We're moving." Ryan and Vicky exchanged smiles over Grace's head, their hands finding each other in the space between their seats. Below them, Cedar Falls grew smaller, the Ashford Industries building just one structure among many no longer looming as the center of their universe. Ahead of them lay uncertainty challenges, difficult conversations about what would come next. The legal battles, the remediation efforts, the rebuilding of a community damaged by corporate greed, but also possibility for healing, for justice, for a kind of happiness Ryan had thought forever beyond his reach. The plane lifted off, banking gently toward the south, towards sunshine and new beginnings. Grace's face was pressed against the window, watching her world transform from the familiar to the unexplored. Ryan felt something similar happening within himself, a transformation, just as profound, just as full of wonder. Beside him, Vicky squeezed his hand, her touch an anchor in this moment of change. "It's going to be okay," she said softly, as if reading his thoughts. "All of it." And for the first time in a very long time, Ryan believed it would be. As the plane climbed higher, leaving behind the autumn chill of Cedar Falls for the warmth of possibility, Ryan thought about that first explosive moment that had started it all. Victoria Ashford mocking Helen's watch, him standing his ground in a basement electrical room. How strange that such an inauspicious beginning could lead here to this moment of shared hope. Life, like electricity, followed unexpected paths. Currents that seemed destined to repel sometimes formed connections instead. And sometimes the most damaged circuits could be rewired, transformed into something new and beautiful and strong. The three of them, Ryan, Grace, and Vicky, were forming such a circuit now. Imperfect, still fragile, but carrying a current of possibility that promised to light their way forward together. 1 year later, the spring sun warmed the grounds of the new Lincoln Community School, casting dappled light through the young maple trees that lined the recently completed playground. Children's laughter echoed across the modern campus, a sound that never failed to bring a smile to Ryan Mitchell's face as he stood on the steps of the main building, watching the afternoon recess in full swing. So much had changed in the years since Thomas Harrington's death had blown open decades of corporate malfeasance and environmental crimes. The original Lincoln Elementary site had been declared a Superfund cleanup location, the extensive remediation process now underway under strict EPA supervision. The school itself had been relocated to a new site 2 miles away on clean land donated by the Edward Ashford Environmental Justice Foundation. The new school was everything the old one hadn't been: spacious, modern, equipped with state-of-the-art facilities, and staffed by the best educators in the region. Its environmental health monitoring systems were pioneering, setting new standards for school safety across the country. More than that, it had become a community center offering adult education classes, health screenings for families affected by the contamination, and legal resources for those still navigating the complex compensation process. Ryan glanced at Helen's watch on his wrist. The leather band had been replaced with a new one, a birthday gift from Vicky, but the watch face remained the same, still keeping perfect time. Some things changed, others endured. The key was knowing which was which. Dad, look what I made." Grace came running across the playground, her blonde hair streaming behind her, a colorful ceramic tile clutched carefully in her hands. At 8 years old, she'd grown taller, her face losing some of its baby roundness, but her eyes remained the same bright blue and full of wonder, so much like Helen's. Ryan knelt to examine her creation, a mosaic piece depicting 3 figures standing before a building that was clearly meant to be the new school. "This is beautiful, Gracie," he said, recognizing the figures as himself, Grace and Vicky. "Is it for the community wall?" Grace nodded enthusiastically. "Ms. Carter says everyone's tile will be part of the big mural in the entrance, so the school will always remember all the people who helped build it." Ryan smiled, touched by the symbolism. The community wall had been Vicky's idea, a mosaic installation where every child and family affected by the Lincoln Heights contamination could contribute a piece, creating something beautiful from the fragments of what had been broken. "She's going to love it," Ryan said, referring to Vicky, who was currently in Washington, D.C., testifying before a congressional committee about corporate environmental accountability. Her transformation from cutthroat CEO to environmental justice warrior had made national headlines, particularly after she'd liquidated most of her personal fortune to fund cleanup efforts and medical support for affected families. "When is she coming home?" Grace asked the question, devoid of any anxiety or insecurity. In her mind, home now naturally included Vicky, a fact that still amazed Ryan given how their journey had begun. "Tomorrow evening," Ryan replied, standing as the bell rang to signal the end of recess, just in time for the dedication ceremony. Grace handed him the tile for safekeeping and raced back to join her classmates, waving at Ryan as her class filed back into the building. He watched her go, his heart full with a mixture of pride and gratitude for her resilience, for the community that had come together in crisis, for the unexpected second chance at happiness that had emerged from the wreckage of Ashford Industries. The legal aftermath of the Harrington scandal had been seismic. Class action lawsuits, criminal investigations, congressional hearings. The ripple effects continued to spread, challenging corporate environmental practices nationwide. Ashford Industries had not survived as an entity, its assets sold off to pay for remediation and victim compensation. But from its ashes, something better had risen. Ryan headed to his office in the school's administrative wing. After years as an electrician, he'd found himself in an unexpected new role as the community liaison for the Edward Ashford Environmental Justice Foundation, working alongside architects, educators, and environmental engineers to create not just a new school, but a new model for community healing after corporate environmental damage. His desk was covered with blueprints for the final phase of the school campus, a memorial garden that would honor those who had suffered health effects from the contamination. Among them was old Mrs. Abernathy from Ryan's apartment building, whose decades-long respiratory problems had finally been linked to her years living near the Harrington chemical plant. She hadn't lived to see the new school completed, but her name would be the first on the memorial wall. Ryan's phone buzzed with a text from Vicky. "Testimony complete. Committee seemed receptive. Senator Williams has agreed to sponsor the Corporate Environmental Accountability Act. Coming home tomorrow as planned. Miss you both." He smiled, still not entirely used to the warmth that flooded him whenever he heard from her. Their relationship had evolved slowly, deliberately, both of them aware of the unusual circumstances that had brought them together and the complexities of building something lasting from such a foundation. The week on Sanibel Island had been a turning point away from the media frenzy, the legal chaos, the corporate collapse. Just three people on a beach, building sandcastles, watching the sunset, learning to be together without crisis as the binding agent. By the time they'd returned to Cedar Falls, something had solidified between them, not yet defined, but undeniably real. In the months that followed, as they'd worked side by side to establish the foundation and begin planning the new school, that undefined connection had deepened. Vicky had rented a small house near Ryan's apartment, coming over for dinner several nights a week, joining their weekend outings, gradually becoming part of their daily rhythm. Grace had accepted her presence with this straightforward adaptability of childhood, moving from calling her Ms. Ashford to Vicky, to occasionally and spontaneously Mom Vicky, a designation that had brought tears to Vicky's eyes the first time she'd heard it. The progression from colleagues to friends to something more had been natural, unforced. Their first kiss had happened on a snowy evening in December after they'd spent hours discussing plans for the new school's science wing. The first time Vicky had stayed the night had been during a blizzard in January, when driving home had become impossible. By spring, the arrangement had become more permanent, though they still maintained separate residences, a boundary that felt important as they navigated this new terrain. Ryan texted back, "We miss you too. Grace made something for the community wall. Can't wait to show you." Finishing up his work for the day, Ryan gathered his things and headed to pick up Grace from her classroom. As he walked through the hallways of the new school, he marveled at how much had changed in a year. The desperate father fighting to save his daughter's school had become part of creating something far better than what had been at risk. The corporate executive who had once mocked his dead wife's watch was now the woman he was falling in love with, the champion for the very community she had once planned to demolish. Life's strangest turns often led to its greatest gifts. That evening, as Ryan helped Grace with her homework at their kitchen table, the same table where he had once spread out overdue bills and worried about affording groceries, he found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. The financial struggles were gone. His position with the foundation provided security he'd never known as an independent electrician. But more than that, the constant weight of facing life's challenges alone had lifted. "Dad," Grace said, looking up from her math worksheet, "do you think Mommy would like our new school?" The question caught Ryan by surprise, though it shouldn't have. Grace had been asking about Helen more frequently lately, trying to connect her memories of her mother to her current life. "I think she would love it," Ryan replied honestly, "especially the part about helping kids who got sick from the contamination. That was always important to her, making sure people who were hurting got the help they needed." Grace nodded, seemingly satisfied. "And do you think she'd like Vicky?" This question was more complex, layered with meanings a child couldn't fully articulate, but somehow instinctively understood. Was it okay to welcome someone new? Would the mother she'd lost approve of the woman who was gradually taking a maternal role in her life? Ryan thought about it carefully before answering. "I think she would. Your mom believed in second chances, in people's capacity to change and grow. And she'd love how much Vicky cares about you, about making sure you are happy and safe." Grace considered this, her expression serious in a way that reminded Ryan forcefully of Helen. "I think so too," she said finally. "And I think she'd be happy that you're not lonely anymore." The simple observation, delivered with a child's directness, touched something deep in Ryan's heart. "You're pretty wise for an 8-year-old. You know that." Grace grinned, the solemn moment passing as quickly as it had come. "Ms. Carter says I'm an old soul. What does that mean?" "It means you understand things that sometimes take other people a lot longer to figure out." The next evening, the entire Lincoln Heights community gathered on the front lawn of the new school for its official dedication ceremony. Families who had fought side by side through the environmental scandal and its aftermath stood together beneath a perfect spring sky, watching as the mayor of Cedar Falls prepared to cut the ribbon stretched across the main entrance. Ryan stood near the front, Grace beside him, both of them scanning the crowd for any sign of Vicky. Her flight had been delayed, and as the ceremony's start time approached, Ryan began to worry she wouldn't make it back in time, something he knew would devastate her after all the work she'd put into making this day possible. Just as the mayor stepped up to the microphone, a taxi pulled up at the edge of the crowd. Vicky emerged slightly disheveled from travel but radiant as she hurried toward them. Grace spotted her first, breaking away from Ryan to run to her, throwing her arms around Vicky's waist in a greeting that made several nearby parents smile knowingly. Ryan watched them approach, struck by how natural they looked together. Grace chattering excitedly, showing off her new dress, bought specially for the occasion. Vicky listening with complete attention, her hand resting gently on Grace's shoulder. The contrast with the Victoria Ashford he'd first met in that basement electrical room couldn't have been more profound. "Made it just in time," Vicky said as she reached him, slightly breathless. Congressional testimony ran long, then weather delays in Chicago. Ryan leaned in, kissing her briefly. "You're here now. That's what matters." The mayor's speech was mercifully brief, touching on the community's triumph over corporate malfeasance and the phoenix-like rise of the new school from the ashes of environmental scandal. When he called Vicky to the podium as the foundation's representative, the applause was genuine. The community's initial suspicion of the former Ashford CEO long since transformed into respect and gratitude. A year ago, Vicky began, her voice steady and clear in the evening air. "Many of us stood on opposite sides of what seemed like an unbridgeable divide. Corporate interests versus community needs. Profit versus people's health and well-being. The future versus the past." She paused, her gaze finding Ryan and Grace in the crowd. "What I've learned since then, what this community has taught me, is that those divisions are artificial. That the healthiest businesses, the strongest communities, the most sustainable futures are built on the understanding that we're all connected. That what harms one of us ultimately harms all of us, and what heals one of us creates the possibility of healing for everyone." The crowd was silent, parents and children alike listening intently as Vicky continued. "My father understood this truth at the end of his life, thanks in part to a remarkable nurse named Helen Mitchell, whose compassion and wisdom helped him see beyond the corporate worldview that had defined his existence. It took me much longer to learn the same lesson, and the teachers were Helen's husband Ryan and their daughter Grace. Ryan felt Grace's small hand slip into his as Vicky's gaze met theirs again, her eyes shining with emotion. This school is more than a building. It's a promise to put people before profits, to value community health over corporate wealth, to ensure that no child's education is compromised by environmental injustice. It's also a reminder that even from the darkest circumstances, something beautiful and lasting can emerge when we choose to stand together rather than apart. After the ceremony, as the crowd dispersed to tour the new facilities and enjoy the celebration, the three of them found a quiet moment on a bench beneath one of the newly planted maple trees. Grace was examining her tile now, officially part of the community wall installation in the school's entrance. "It's perfect," Vicky told her, genuine admiration in her voice. The very heart of the whole mural. Grace beamed at the praise. "Ms. Carter says art helps us tell our stories. And this is our story now, right, the three of us?" Ryan and Vicky exchanged glances over Grace's head, a world of meaning passing between them. "Yes," Ryan said, reaching for Vicky's hand. "This is our story now." Later that evening, after Grace had gone to bed, Ryan and Vicky stood on the small balcony of their apartment, looking out at the lights of Cedar Falls spread below them. The night was clear. Stars visible despite the city glow, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of spring blossoms. "I have something to show you," Vicky said, pulling an envelope from her bag. "The realtor sent it while I was in Washington." She handed Ryan a set of photographs showing a charming craftsman-style house on the edge of town with a large yard bordered by mature trees and a wraparound porch perfect for summer evenings. "It's a short walk to the new school," Vicky continued, watching his face carefully. "4 bedrooms, so Grace would have her own space plus a room for guests, and maybe—" She trailed off suddenly, uncertain. Though they'd been practically living together for months, they hadn't explicitly discussed making it permanent, hadn't talked about the possibility of expanding their family beyond the three of them. Ryan looked up from the photos, understanding the unspoken question in her hesitation. "It's beautiful," he said softly. "A perfect place for new beginnings." Vicky smiled, a relief and happiness illuminating her face. "That's what I thought too." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, both contemplating the future taking shape before them. Unexpected and unplanned, but somehow right in a way neither could have imagined a year ago. "You know," Ryan said finally, "Helen used to say that love doesn't follow predictable paths. That sometimes it finds you in the most unexpected places with the most unlikely people." "Wise woman," Vicky replied, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I wish I could have known her." Ryan slipped his arm around her waist, drawing her closer. "In a way you do. Through Grace, through me, through the changes her influence set in motion even after she was gone." Below them, the lights of Cedar Falls twinkled like earthbound stars, a constellation of lives and stories interconnected in ways visible only from a distance. Somewhere among those lights was the new Lincoln Community School, its windows dark now, but ready to illuminate young minds when morning came. "Some things are worth fighting for," Vicky said quietly, echoing the words she'd spoken in that tense moment at Ashford Industries a year earlier. "Even when it costs you everything." Ryan turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "And sometimes what seems like losing everything is actually making room for something better." As they stood together in the gentle spring night, the past year's journey from adversaries to allies to family unfolded in both their minds, a reminder that even the most broken beginnings could lead to the most beautiful endings. Or perhaps not endings at all, but rather new chapters in a story still being written one day at a time.